Metal Brick Road. What's your name?
Keith.
Keith?
My friends call me Keith. You can call me John.
Okay, John.
Nobody played like Keith Moon before. Everybody kind of, you know, and he...
He's the best bass player in rock and roll, ever, no contest.
Bassist, I'm not too sure, but bass guitarist, you know. I mean, I've always insisted that I play bass guitar and not bass.
And you must be Roger.
I must be.
Who are you?
Yeah.
You're Roger?
I'm Roger.
And where are you from?
Oz.
In those days, your performances used to end up with you smashing all your equipment. There were stories about you smashing hotel rooms on every
all
tour
lies.
you went on.
Not a word of truth.
Greetings, pop pickers. Welcome, mods and rockers alike. Thank you all for coming to today's special show of What You Do for a Long Time about my favourite rock band of all time, The Who. Also, arguably the greatest rock band of all time. Many people will argue otherwise, of course, but that's just my view. Now, a lot of you may say, but Brian, I thought you loved the Beatles, and I do. But I've for many years seen the Beatles as outside of the pantheon of any musical limitation, and they're just this thing, this cultural thing that sits there completely separate and are judged on entirely different in different circumstances. And the Who, of course, continue to exist for nearly 60 years, and they played live and and still play live to this day. And so I see them as being the rock band. I think they're the original monsters of rock. And we're going to be talking about that today, and what their influences on, what became heavy metal, hard rock, and so on. And given that they started out as a very different kind of band and more in the mod era, and moved to more a little bit of psychedelic, and then decided, screw it, we're just going to play really loud and make heavy rock music. So, so there's a lot of talk about this progression to go on today, and we're going to be talking about those of us on the panel talk about what we got us into the Who. What some of our famous favourite Who songs and albums are, what our favourite concert experiences are, because the Who were very much a live band. Their live act was extremely different very often from the recorded output. We're going to show some of our memorabilia and collectibles. We're going to be asking you guys in the Sorry Brahma Bull, I know you're a Colorado Avalanche fan, but I'm wearing my Stars hat. Showing some of our memorabilia and collectibles, and we're going to have some fun talking about some of the exciting moments, particularly around that lunatic Keith. So thank you everyone in the chat for joining me. I can see we've got a bunch of great people. Mark D with a C, Hail Buddy, Lord Thoth, Brahma Bull, Dragon Master, Kitty Bear, Legalize Adulthood, who's going to be on the panel, Purple Valkyrie, hello my dear, always good to see you, D-Bud Martin, Lonnie Holcomb. I noticed it's Courtney is going to be listening. She's busy and unfortunately can't join us today. I always appreciate her musical insight. Hopefully I'm not missing anybody, and there will be others later. Others are going to be joining us. But right now I have two guests to join me, and so I will introduce those guys. So first of all, a guy who I've spoken offline many times with about the Who. He's a real aficionado like myself. Welcome to Legalize Adulthood. How are you, sir?
Good to be here. Thanks for letting me join your little panel.
No problem. I could not have a Who special without you. There's no doubt about that, because you and I have spoken many times about the Who and shared our experiences, and I think you've got some interesting stuff to say.
Well, I hope so. We'll see when we get into it.
Yeah, and I do like your avatar, Keith Moon as Robert Newton. So, as Robert Newton, yeah, the pirate. And Keith loved dressing up, and we'll be talking a little bit about that later. And he loved undressing too, which was just part of the issue. So thank you for joining me. I really appreciate that. We're going to be really delving into a lot of Who minutiae, I think is the word. So my second guest today is a man who knows the difference between a rock and a hard place. He has a channel where he is developing some great content on hard rock, heavy metal. It is Pope Metallica's The First.
Very important.
Or Pope Metallica's Eye.
No, it's the first for when I lose my channel inevitably.
Yeah,
I started that tradition on Twitter, and well, now I can't go on Twitter, so whatever.
Yeah, well,
but thank you for having me.
No problem, my friend. And I know that you've got, and you and I are going to be streaming later in the week about Saxon and stuff.
That
You've
should
got a
be
very hard rock metal perspective, and the Who to me were one of the founding influences of that. I think they would have said, Pete particularly would have said, well, we're not a heavy metal band, not a hard rock band. I think if you watch them, particularly that clip of them at Woodstock, that was pretty loud and heavy. So he thinks he protests too much.
Right.
But how is your day going anyway?
Going pretty good. Spent most of it listening to the Who and prepare for the stream, because it's a band that I'm familiar with them, obviously, but more due to my parents' influence than anything else.
Sure. And and I definitely want to get your perspective on the potential influences that you see on later bands, and obviously you've seen and listened to material. So, so bunch of things to talk about today. I think I'd like to start off with a little bit of a summary of just how we got into the Who, and for myself, and I know Legal Eyes, you've got experiences there, and Metallica. So as you all know, I'm of a certain age, born in '63, 4 years after Pete and John played in their first band, the Confederates. So at least they're still older than me. And I very much remember as a kid listening to the radio, and most of those experiences were listening to pop radio. So the Beatles particularly stuck out for me as a little 3-4-year-old kid, remembering listening to those. I don't recall listening to the Who in the same way, although Substitute seems to have stuck in my mind from those early days. I think for me, when I really took notice of the Who is when it got into the early 70s and started watching Top of the Pops in Britain and watching Old Grey Whistle Test and really listening to music, and supposed to just, you know what you're like when you're a kid, you hear something and, oh, that sounds like fun, whatever. You start listening to music. And I saw this band on Top of the Pops, these 4 weird guys playing Join Together and Squeeze Box and songs like that. I thought, that's interesting. And then my older brother had a copy of Who's Next, which I think was 1972. And I said, well, I'm going to give this a listen, even though I don't know any of the songs on it. And I thought, that's really fucking good. And I was about 10 at the time. So I recorded it on my cassette player. This is how I got into stuff. And then later on, there was an album I'm going to share, which introduced me really fully to the Who. I mean, going to some of my friends' houses that had records. By this time, this is 76. I'll be about 13. This album is one of the first compilation albums I recall about the Who. There was an earlier Meaty Beaty Big and Bouncy. It was a double album called The Story of the Who. They advertised it on television, and it had a great advert of an exploding pinball machine. And it stuck in my mind. And I didn't have the money to buy it, but one of my friends had it, so I tape recorded it on cassette. Listening to that again and again and again, that just hooked me. That was it. I was in for the Who from that point onwards, and I went back and started listening to the old stuff. I was old enough to appreciate it, I think, as opposed to the pop stuff that had come before. So that was kind of my early introduction to the Who, and then a little bit later came concert going and buying my own records, which we'll cover in a little while. So just before I get to you guys, I'd like to introduce my next guest, who I'm very pleased is joining us. It's my very good partner in chat on many shows. It's the wonderful Toxic Man Flu.
Hello,
you, sir?
70s. How are you? How are you? Pope, good to see you again. Legalize Adulthood.
Always good to see you, man.
Always good to see you. And Legalize Adulthood, good to meet you. How are you?
Hey, how you doing?
Good, good. So I'm just wondering who we're talking about. Ha ha, ha ha, ha.
Well, you'll have to guess who.
I'm guessing who.
There's probably more of those, but I can't quite think of any of them.
Jefferson Airplane? No, no, it's not that. Dawkins? No. The name escapes me.
A little English band, very popular with hotel chains and guitar manufacturers.
I've heard that.
Yes.
I've heard they were they were upstanding citizens when it came to those kind of things. I'm not quite sure why they hate guitars, but
well behaved, always towed the line. But yes, there's the famous story of I think it was on the Russell Harty or Melvin Bragg show where Pete's trying to explain the gap between what they earned and how much they spent every week in damages, hotel rooms and guitars. Saying, well, who covered the gap? Well, we're not too sure how that...
We don't know how it happened. Yeah.
I used to steal guitars off Marshall's music shop.
That's
Just taking a guitar, bring it right back.
That's right. You'd rush in. I'll be back later. Yeah.
I
good
remember,
old days.
I remember an episode of Top Gear where they were interviewing Roger Daltrey and just obviously talked about some of the stuff they used to get up to, and it was just hilarious because Jeremy brought up the fact of it's like Keith putting the Rolls Royce into a swimming pool, and he goes, yes, but that's not the impressive part. The impressive part was the pool was on the second floor.
Well, we're definitely going to talk about that story later. But let's keep that one in the back burner because that's going to form a little bit of an interesting conversation later. So to go to keep going around you guys and get your initial impressions, turn to Legalize Adulthood, my friend. What's your story of The Who?
So before I get into that, just briefly, that Story of The Who, that was a UK only release. We didn't get that in the States except as an import. So my first Who record that I ever bought was the compilation you mentioned right before that, Meaty Beaty Big and Bouncy, which was a collection of basically all of their singles, and a bunch of those singles, because The Who started out as a band producing singles. If you were a band in the early 60s, you were focused on writing hit singles to get into the charts, and the LP was a secondary afterthought. And so what happened was The Who had all these high charting singles, and they weren't on any album that you could buy in the States. So they came up with Meaty Beaty Big and Bouncy for MCA Records. Might have been on Polydor in the US at first, but I think it was MCA.
Yeah.
But by the time I bought my copy, it was definitely MCA. And it contained basically all of their charting singles up until that point, which is it came out around 71. So it included Pinball Wizard, but it didn't include anything from Who's Next. So it kind of was a way to catch up on the band before Tommy. And the first Who song that I ever can remember was Pinball Wizard, but it was the version from the Tommy movie that was Elton John's version of Pinball Wizard.
Yeah.
And I heard that.
Boots.
And
big
then,
boots.
yeah, the 6 foot tall boots that were like, a death trap. But so that song it charted in the US on the pop charts, and it kind of revived Pinball Wizard. And I was in, some department store in Delaware with my mom, and we were shopping, and I saw Meaty Beaty Big and Bouncy, and it had Pinball Wizard on it, and it had Magic Bus on it, which was a song I'd heard on the album Oriented Rock radio stations. And so I got that album, and man, what a great intro, because you got all their great singles from their pop charting singles period. And you get a little bit of a taste for, some of the, not so well-known songs, because Boris the Spider is on there. But I ended up, loving Can't Explain from the moment I heard it, and that's still, if I had to pick one single Who song that I had to live with for the rest of my life and I couldn't listen to anything else, I would take 2 minutes 30 of I Can't Explain. I don't know why. I just love that song.
Guitar riff, that
Rickenbacker sound, yeah.
Love it. And I love a Rickenbacker. Yeah, love that. Yeah, it does catch you, and I've seen some great live performances of them by that too. It is a standout song.
I think it is their most performed song, because when I look over bootleg set lists, either Substitute or I Can't Explain is always the first song.
Yeah. I was also listening to a great cover by the Scorpions the other day. They do a great cover of it. That's a different story.
They were around at that time too.
Yeah, they did.
Scorpions started in '67.
That's right. Yeah. So as you say, it's interesting what you say about the compilations. The Who have been a very compilation friendly band because so many tracks didn't go on their albums, and they've not got that many studio albums. When you look at a band that's been going so long, it's maybe only like 10 or 12 for 60 years. So a lot of compilations, a lot of singles and throwaway tracks that didn't end up on albums, particularly leading up to Tommy, when they'd stockpiled singles to keep, because that took so long to make, to keep them in the public eye. So lots of great outtakes and B-sides that never appear on an album. So they're a very fertile band for compilations.
And in a lot of ways, they're kind of the opposite of Beatles in that, where, the Beatles had 18 studio albums and they were only around for 7 years.
Yeah, it was just like, I think the Who had like 4 albums in the 60s, if you're lucky,
Yeah, I think maybe 2 or 3, and then Who's Next was 71, so.
Well, thanks for that insight, Legalize. Yeah, it's interesting. It was compilation albums that got me in, pretty much, other than Who's Next. So, Metallica's my friend. What's your experiences with the Who and listening to the Who?
Well, I mean, obviously, I got introduced to the Who by my dad and both my parents, really, who were around in the '60s, and a lot of their later stuff is really where I focus on, because it's the stuff I know better. Because they were mostly fans of like the '70s and '80s stuff, which is really funny because they were around in the '60s and listening to the music at the time, and they just for whatever reason had just slept on the Who. And there's always that band that with me it was all the stuff in the '90s with all the grunge stuff. So not the best time for music, but I got into them through them, and then when I got older, I started getting into music a lot more. They were a band I kept coming back to because, they're a lot of the bands I listened to that are from like the '70s and '80s all grew up listening to the Who.
Yeah, yeah.
So they're a huge influence on, especially the hard rock and heavy metal scene, especially that stage presence of just smashing guitars and just generally being loud and out of control. Certainly had an influence on the early metal, on a lot of the early metal bands.
Yeah, well, that's a fascinating topic because I do think they're the prototype hard rock, heavy metal band, potentially seen as a prototype of that. Certainly, hard rock bands, which are
they're certainly
in those days. Of course, they didn't really have a distinction, and in fact, it used to be all just pop music. But I think the Who almost invented the idea of a hard rock band. Once they did start to go into Woodstock and so on, and did those, everything became really loud for them.
Well, them and Deep Purple were really the proto, and Zeppelin in a lot of ways too, became like the proto metal bands essentially.
Yeah, and they were in an arms race to see who could be the loudest band, the three of them. And for a while, the Who held the Guinness Book of Records record. Deep Purple held it for a while. Then the Who got it back, and then Motorhead got it, and then it just became anybody could get it because the technology had increased. But in the days the Who were doing it, and Purple, it took a lot of effort to get that kind of volume. I mean, you had wall-to-wall stacks of speaker cabinets, and they were forever trying to get bigger and bigger amps. And it's only 2 or 3 years before that all you could get was a 100-watt amp. These guys were like, I want bigger, I want louder. And the Who particularly, I think, liked loud because they couldn't reproduce a lot of the more sophisticated music on things like Tommy with the different instruments. So they just basically made it as loud as they could to cover up for that. And it was magnificent.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that's part of the beauty of a live show too, is you get to play around and do something different than you do on your albums.
Yeah.
So you mentioned Woodstock, and something that people don't necessarily understand unless you were going to concerts at that time is Woodstock is really the first time where they engineered a sound system that was massive enough that it could actually reach that big crowd. Before that, like you said, the amplifiers were small, and they were stacked up on the stage. Woodstock had speaker towers out in the crowd. I think that was something new. If it had been done before, it hadn't been done very often before. And the fact that they made the film of that experience, and then the film came out, and the film brought that huge rock sound to millions of people that had never had the opportunity to experience anything like that in person.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the Who were a huge influence in that. I know I'm just going to get to Toxic in a minute for his thoughts, but the Who headlining Monterey, and then with Jimi Hendrix, and then later again Woodstock with Hendrix. A lot of the bands on those bills were very folk oriented, very quiet, played acoustic sets, whatever. The Who and Hendrix just went out there to do these monstrous loud rock gigs, and it just blew everyone away. I don't think anyone had really seen anything like that.
Well, I think that's one of the things that made Woodstock into what it would turn into as like a legend of live concerts. Like Woodstock is number one probably in terms of when people think of a rock concert, they think of either Woodstock or Queen's performance at Live Aid, and that's probably the reason why, because they were just perfect performances.
But without the Who and Hendrix, that gig would have been a lot of folkies twiddling in the. To a certain extent, I'm over exaggerating, but because you had Santana and other bands like that. But the Who said we're going to just blow the shit out of this place, and that windmilling thing. There was a clip at the beginning. That's Woodstock. They just went out and destroyed it, and that created the rock monster concert festival performance. I think they were the first, and Hendrix too. Of course, he did similarly. So we owe a lot to them. We owe a debt of gratitude. Every festival, and the Isle of Wight, Legal, as you mentioned, that after 1970 in Britain, the same thing. The Who just destroyed that because they played so loud with such ferocity. And they had, it was great.
They had a bit of an advantage coming into Woodstock as well, because they had been touring Tommy around the world. And so they had been playing Tommy end to end over and over and over again. So by the time they get to Woodstock, which is, late summer, it was second nature for them. It was a machine. They already knew, like, oh, we can drop out some of these filler fluff songs in the middle, like Christmas and a couple of the more obscure Tommy songs, and kind of shrink it down a little bit. But for the most part, it's about 80% of the double album, and they could just play it from beginning to end. And they learned that what Pete would refer to as the tripartite show organization, where they start with a couple of singles, like I Can't Explain, as a substitute to warm up. Then they play all of Tommy or whatever all of the new material is for the time period. And then they finish it off with some songs that, end up being the blockbusters. That's kind of when they get the Who's next material in there. But for Tommy, you just play it all the way through to the end, and it ends with, Listening to You as the finale, which they end up playing right as the sun's coming up, because they got on so late at Woodstock.
Yeah, it couldn't have been timed better. And there's such power in the riff when Pete's playing that, just soaring, goes up and up. But
and the other thing is, this is when Roger really comes into his own as a vocalist.
Yeah.
Before that, he had various vocal styles. We can talk about this, how he's trying to sound like a bluesman and stuff, because they all love the blues so much. But with Tommy, he really comes into his own and finds his own voice.
He did. Pete's often said that as well. Roger, it created Roger. He found a role to play, and he could fulfill it playing Tommy, and then he translated that into other stuff too. But that he inhabited that fully, and it allowed his voice to suddenly do something he hadn't really done too much of before. That soaring, throated. And there's another thing, Roger's full-throated screaming and whatever. That became a thing after that for bands, There's always a screamer.
Well, I mean, I think he did it because Ian Gillan could do it, and he pretty much figured that anything Ian can do, I can do better.
That's right. Yeah.
Basically,
So Gillan had a scream, all right, man. So Toxic, my friend, I just wanted to let you have your hello. Let you. I'm going to see if I can rotate you into a certain view, so you get the spotlight. There you go. Love the logo. So tell me, my friend,
I'm in a spotlight.
You're in a similar age frame to me, albeit I'm in better shape.
I'm better looking, but you do have the better body, so we'll go with that. Yeah.
So tell me about your Who story.
So for me, I did not really know about the Who until the musical. So they had the Tommy musical that came out, and I'd heard them, and that was in '92.
I have the book here.
Yeah. So I had known the songs and had listened to them. I knew more about Queen and things such as that. But my early rock life was pretty sheltered. My parents were more from the early 60s. So you're talking Beach Boys, Jan and Dean, the Ventures, those kind of California beach type things, Herb Alpert, Tijuana Brass. And the exposure that I got from rock was from my cousin. And then eventually I was working on a album rock station in the late 80s. And I played the Who songs and all that from there. We did Tommy, we did all that stuff. But I didn't really start getting into the Who until the musical. And it just shows how varied the music scene was. So I was born after, right in the middle of all this stuff happening for them. I got into different bands. I got into Jimi Hendrix. I got into the Beach Boys. I got into Queen, pretty heavy into Queen. I got into Dokken. I got into Black Sabbath. Those kind of things. I started going down that road. But my Christian upbringing, I didn't get into those. I will embarrassingly admit, the first album I was ever allowed to buy on my own was the Village People's double album Sleazy. So I see that 70s rock fan is about to shoot me down.
It's all beginning to make sense now.
Exactly. And so I always wanted to be the cowboy, and in that scenario. So
where's Grant Gregory when we need him?
Exactly. But I knew these bands, I heard these songs, and to me it was just a collection of songs. And it was okay, Who, there's this, the top, the ones that made the top of the charts. Pinball Wizard was there. Okay, it was a video by the time I was really looking at that. There were pieces and stuff that came up from there. And when the musical happened, I was like, there's more to this than that. And I started researching about the Who at that point. So that was in the early 90s when that happened. And what I discovered as I started learning about the Who and what they had done and their concerts and all of these firsts that you have all talked about to this point, I looked at what they were trying to do with Tommy, and I looked at what the Beach Boys were trying to do with Pet Sounds, right? And I realized you had some very creative people that were limited by the technology that they had, the recording technology, the amps, they could only go so much, the guitars, all that stuff. There was only so much that they could do. And I look at what Tommy has become over the years and the movie, the improvements and stuff and things from there. I got caught up in that. And then I went out and I bought the album, and I bought their studio albums, and I was listening to them all the way through. And I worked for 4 years at an album rock station and never once played Tommy all the way through, because they were into more like Boston and Pink Floyd. Pink Floyd, All right. Every single album they have, no, I probably could sing it note for note. And that's where I first got into the Who, was and deep into them, to start actually researching, knowing. I knew his name was Roger, but I didn't know his last name was Daltrey until the musical hit and I started doing research back, which makes me feel very inadequate on this panel.
Well, are you not used to feeling inadequate, though? I mean, that's...
Well, I am. I've been married a few times, and they've kept me straight.
I mean, it's a way of life for me.
Mm-hmm. But I've actually, the X, the second one I talk about, the Horatius She-Devil, I was in a casino, the Mohegan Sun Casino.
I know.
I'm not going to say the year. Yes, I'm not going to say the year. But I went there, and the Who was playing. And I'm like, I'm going to go watch them. So we went, and we drove out there. And my ex is, I'm going to go get coffee. And it was general admission. So I'm standing in line. No, hurry up. I want to make sure that we get as close as we can. And she comes back with the coffee. She goes, there was a nice man in front of me. I said, look, my husband's waiting to get into this Who show, and it's general admission. We want to get as much as we can. He doesn't want to go in without me. Do you mind if I go in front of you? And he was very nice. He said, yes, 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 and called me dear. And she went and got her coffee, and he got his, and they were talking on the way back. And she came up in line, and then we go through, we get our tickets, general admission, we're out there. The band comes on. Here's Roger Daltrey. Here's Pete Townsend up front doing all that stuff. She turns to me and goes, hey, that's the guy that with the coffee. And she's pointing at Pete Townsend. And I'm like,
It's at that point that you strangled her.
Right. I mean, I understand she was a big Metallica head. Okay. But I'm like, you had a 10-minute conversation with Pete Townsend.
Yeah,
probably didn't ask him a single thing about music either, probably.
They talked about kids. She talked about the kids and stuff. Oh, it was fun. And we're doing all this stuff there.
He probably enjoyed that, though. It was refreshing for him. Yeah.
And that's, she asked, didn't know who he was. And the thing was, they had the playbill stuff throughout the entire casino. And I'm like, you picked this up and thumbed through this. And it was him and Roger Daltrey on the front of the playbill magazine for the casino. And I'm like, you didn't? She goes, I don't know. He didn't look like that. He's wearing a scarf and something else. And I was like, oh, that's great. But I'm so glad that I got to see them live and got to see the show. I mean, they were older at that point. They weren't doing the crazy things and stuff from there. But my parents weren't into them. And it's really something that I didn't get exposed to that as a younger age, like many of you have.
But there's there's no time expiry on good music, I mean, you can get into it any time.
Well, their music is better than the vast majority of things that we're getting today.
Yeah.
I would love to see that this group, given modern technology, in their creative prime. That's what would Tommy have been had they been able to pull in all of this recording equipment that we have now.
Well, it's an interesting discussion about the making of Tommy, and it would probably take an entire show on its own. But the comment from Pete that I particularly remember was he'd spent a lot of time making this album, making Tommy, and they did overdub after overdub and whatever. And eventually Kit Lambert said, look, this is costing us a fortune. You're going to have to put this thing out. So they actually ended up putting out as Tommy, it was not the finished article. If you listen to it, it's quite an acoustic album. There's a lot of acoustic guitar, a lot of rhythm guitar. He didn't have time to overdub all his electric lead guitar over every track. He ran out of time. So what we really get there is an almost unfinished document, which if he'd had 6 more months and another £10,000 or whatever it was at the time, he could have done it. But Kit Lambert kept saying, look, enough. It's great as it is. I love it. And put it out. So they did. And to this day, I love listening to it, especially if you listen to it in surround sound. I get the DVD audio 5.1. It's unbelievable, but it is quite acoustic. compared to the live show. And of course, it's got the extra instrumentation on it, which you can't do live. So basically, as Pete said, John made up for that by playing that loud bass with all the harmonics and on it to fill in the sound at the back. But yeah, it's a very unfinished album in Pete's eyes, even though he spent like a year on it.
Well, I think that's a good point, and I don't remember if it was Pope that said it or you, 70s. They did a lot. They did studio albums. So I guess you could look at Tommy and say it's like 5 or 6 studio albums in one. But there are bands that went out and did the live stuff. And there are bands who did the in studio. One of the issues that I have with seeing live bands is, for me, just personal enjoyment. If I can't get what I got on the album, it's just not right to me. Now, I enjoyed live shows. I enjoy that kind of stuff. And with Tommy, when we were there and I was watching them live, they were a little older. They could still play, circles around a lot of people. They had the technology to be able to deliver some of the songs that they did from Tommy the way that they were on the studio album. And it really made a difference. So if I'd have gone to see them in the mid to late 80s when I was concert going as a teenager, that technology wasn't exactly there. And I think it would have been a different experience for me as opposed to seeing them in the mid 2000s, early to mid 2000s, with a full complement of all of the advances that had happened at that point. And bringing in a band like Rush, they had 3 members, and then they played bass with the pedals and all that kind of stuff from there, or someone like Boston, who had created so much of technology and pushed the envelope. I think it's just a golden age of the technology increasing and the artists pushing the envelope. And I brought up Pet Sounds because it's also an unfinished album, similar to Tommy, and it's also something that is great studio, but it's not good live. And in my opinion, I would say that.
You said something interesting though, and Metallica and I were talking about this before the show, that you like to go to a concert and hear the record, which is nothing wrong with that. I'm not knocking that in the slightest. There's plenty of bands I've been to that have been like that, Steely Dan and Crowded House and so on, bands like that. You do want to hear that. One of the things I love about The Who is that it doesn't sound like the record. Because of those limitations, they had to do something entirely different live. Mainly louder, of course.
Right.
But John had to do all this bass stuff. Pete had to really play 3 parts at once. I think Metallica, you and I were talking about this, and I mean, we kind of like it when they don't do the same thing sometimes.
And especially as a guitar player, like hearing what Pete was doing is just, it's a lot more complicated than he makes it look.
There's also unlike a lot of their contemporaries, there's no rhythm guitarist in The Who, and there's no lead guitarist either. So what you often have is you'll have Pete playing rhythm and John doing something melodic on the bass. Yeah. And then you've got Pete doing a lead and John doing something rhythmic to support Pete. So they're playing back and forth against each other, filling in the gaps where they can. And then you've got, when Keith Moon is in the band, you've got him doing very melodic things on the drum kit. These fill patterns and things. There's always some kind of extra flourish going on. And that's very different from a lot of their contemporaries where they had 2 guitarists, one doing rhythm and one doing the lead. And I want to go back to what Toxic was saying about, what he likes in a concert experience. Really what you were describing with The Who about them, later being able to pull off the full vision of Tommy. Well, it's double or triple or 4 times as hard to pull off Quadrophenia. They weren't able to pull that off until the mid 90s.
And that's where they had all they had problems with tapes. They had taped keyboards to try and do some of the synthesizer and keyboard stuff, and they were always going out of time and breaking. So they managed
to pull it off for Bob O'Reilly and Won't Get Fooled Again. They got that one down. But the backing tapes for things like The Real Me, where it begins with the sounds of the sea, that never quite worked. And although they would play The Real Me later, like they played it in the 90s and 2000s with Zach Starkey on drums, but they didn't have any backing tapes at all. Who Are You? They could play with a backing tape for the synthesizer part. And that worked fine. I think when it's a backing track that persists, the tape persists through the entire duration of the song, as it does with Bob O'Reilly and Who Are You and Won't Get Fooled Again, then that's fine. The band can sync to it, right? But when it comes and goes, like, just a segment of a song having a backing tape, that's I could see that being a total frustration, which is why they dropped it from the live performances until later. Like I said, in mid-90s, they did the 6 shows at Madison Square Garden, and they did 6 shows in London.
Well, I think that shows the beauty and the genius of the band. When you're at that edge, pushing the technology and availability of what you can do now with your talent, that really shows how talented they were. And I don't think you can underscore enough just how talented each of these people were at their individual instruments, including Roger's voice. Right? You're seeing things, you're talking about stuff that Pete does on guitar and the things that are being done on bass that if you don't have a good bass player, you're going to suck. Right? If you don't have a good drummer,
and
you're going to suck.
As John said in the opening montage clip, I'm not a bass player, I'm a bass guitarist, and that's true.
Exactly.
Bass guitar. He was actually good enough to be a lead guitarist, Pete said, but he wanted to play bass, so but he was doing all the things a lead guitarist would do.
Yeah, you can give somebody a 5-6 string bass that has that kind of talent, and it'll seem like they're playing 3 or 4 different parts.
Yeah.
Right.
And we're gonna try and play a little bit of John playing the 515 bass solo, which you saw a little bit of when he was playing that with the camera. We're gonna try and play a little bit more of that later. Hopefully, not get.
And watching those guys play too is just magical. Like as somebody on that level of talent. Like last year, I went to see Primus doing "A Farewell to Kings" by Rush, and it was, first of all, Les Claypool can apparently sing like Geddy Lee. Didn't know that, but he can. And just watching him play the bass, like the way he does, is just ridiculous.
Yeah, good
just magic.
Bass player is phenomenal, and it adds, like John added 10 layers to the sound. I mean, the first time I ever saw them live, I kept thinking, where's the second guitar? Well, he's playing the Pinball Wizard. He's giving it that's the bass,
Yep.
And then, of course, he played the famous, probably the most famous first bass solo anyone can remember on My Generation. So the middle break is him playing the bass solo on the Dan Electro. No, I don't think anyone had really, there might have been before, but that's the famous one everyone remembers.
Yeah, I mean, it was certainly among the first. And that's one thing I did want to highlight with The Who is they've been at the leading edge of a lot of different trends in rock and roll. Whether it be, they were one of the first bands to really use synthesizers when they first started coming out, and they really did a great job with it too. And they used them in new and innovative ways. And even just that live sound, all that stuff, it was all them leading the charge on it.
Yeah, so the synthesizer thing, and I think I've got a really good photo of that if I can share it, is Pete was really into that and the sequencers. I gotta get this on screen. There we go. So he along with Pink Floyd, who were also trying to do the same stuff at the same time, he really pioneered that. So all that Bob O'Reilly, Won't Get Fooled Again stuff, he really worked on that. And that's when it was a room full of equipment. He was a pioneer in that for sure, he's a guitar player, but there he was doing all this stuff.
Well, this goes beyond being a musician. This is a creator, right? All of this equipment wasn't there, and it had to be created for these things. And for them to have that kind of input, I'll bring in maybe sacrilege with this channel, but Daft Punk, what they did, I mean, they could play the oscilloscope and create music out of that. And
Yeah.
I hearken back to people like this image here, and what you can see with what Tom Schultz did at Boston, and seeing what the Beach Boys did with Pet Sounds. They pushed and could make music with anything. Right? Keith Moon could probably walk into that room with a pair of sticks and knock out one of the best, drum solos you've ever heard. Right? That's just the talent that you see. It goes beyond music. They were creating. And I don't see a whole lot of that today.
I should point out I've got nothing against Daft Punk. I've got a lot of electronic stuff.
Yeah,
So-
I dig Daft Punk. They were ahead of
I'm a
that
big-
90s techno revolution.
I'm a big
Pioneers.
Kraftwerk fan. I've seen Kraftwerk live twice. Not many people can say that. So
Before we get too
All right,
far
well, there
away
you go.
from bass playing,
Yeah.
do you guys know which song both Pete and John are playing bass on?
Substitute.
Is it?
No,
Okay.
no, it's much later.
Is
I
it
didn't
Big
kn- I
Bottom?
didn't know it was
It's
a
not
thing,
Big
so-
Bottom, is it?
No, that's
It's
Spinal
Spinal
Tap.
Tap.
A Spinal Tap.
I don't know, my friend.
Stonehenge.
Trick of the Light. Trick of the Light.
Okay, I'm
Both
gonna-
John and Pete are playing bass, and that's why they don't play that very often live. They've only played it live like a few times.
Yeah,
Well, there's
I don't
something to
know
be
if-
said for the fact that when they play their live stuff, they don't bring anybody else on.
Well, they do now, but they didn't
Back then, though,
back in
they
the
didn't.
day.
Yeah.
But
Yeah,
they
they
also,
had
Roger
the,
played harmonica too, of course. But
They had the big ensemble in the '89 Tommy tour, had a lot of extra people. And then when they did the mid '90s Quadrophenia revival, they had extra people come on. They had different singers sing the different parts of the rock opera.
Well, they start-
2000
they
and
started-
2002 was a stripped down 5-piece. And then later tours, they've gone back to adding a few more people. They've added Simon Townsend, Pete's brother.
And Zach Starkey, the drummer, is phenomenal. I've seen Zach many times with the Who and other bands. He's a phenomenal drummer.
That's got to be a hard position to be in, though, being not only replacing the original drummer, but when that drummer's Keith fucking Moon. Like, how do you step in?
So, they
I
had
think
Kenny
Zach
Jones
does it well, though.
step in, after Keith's death. And I like Kenny. I like the stuff he did with the Faces and the Small Faces, but he never quite had the right gel for the Who, I don't think.
Yeah, he's not a flamboyant drummer. I mean, I
But
love the
neither
Small
is Zach
Faces and the
Starkey.
Faces.
Zach Starkey's
No.
not flamboyant.
No,
I mean,
but he's got great technique and he does play a big kit.
Yes. There's some, like, if you it came out as a bonus disc on I think it was a bonus disc on Isle of Wight, but there's a bonus disc DVD that came out that has the entire Rock Palace show from '81, where Kenny is the drummer, and he's good, but just the feel is off. I can't quite put it into
the
words.
chemistry isn't quite there. And I actually discovered the other day in a Phil Collins interview that he said he'd gone to Pete and said, "I want to join the Who," after Keith died. And he said, "It's the only band I would ever have left Genesis for." And Pete said, "I'm sorry, we've already asked Kenny. We can't go back on that now." But Phil Collins was wanting to join.
What a
Wow.
combination that would have been.
I can
right?
only imagine what that would have sounded like.
And you
it
think
was
of the
just
songs
glorious.
he would have brought as well. Hey, not to be. So I just want to briefly pause to bring in our next guest, and I'm very honoured and pleased that he's able to join us on a busy day for him. It's the exceptional Mr. Tom Connors.
Hello.
Hello, sir. How are you?
I'm doing all right. How about you guys?
Oh, we're doing great. We're having a fantastic conversation about the Who, and it's leading down all sorts of interesting roads. And well, I mean, I'm saying it's great. The other guys might not be agreeing.
Well, I had a few minutes and I thought I'd hop in. So yeah.
I appreciate that, my friend, because I know you and I have discussed this many times. You're heavily into music, and you certainly know your music history too. So, what are
From
your
time to
what's
time.
your from time to time? What is your story of the Who? What's your background with them?
The Who is, I mean, they're definitely one of those bands I love a lot, but they're not like in my higher range. My kid probably likes them better than I do. No, I think they're great. They've got some really great hits, some solid albums. I've always been a fan. I can't think of a reason not to like them as far as that goes.
Have you ever seen any of the movies, like The Kids Are All Right, or the?
I've seen Tommy. I'm trying to think if I've seen The Kids Are All Right or not. I'm trying to. If I have, it's been a long time ago.
Yeah, which is the first documentary movie that really got me excited about a band.
I think I have.
Yeah, if you've seen Spinal Tap, you've seen parodies of chunks of The Kids Are All Right.
Well, that I know,
It does contain some of the crazy moments, that's true.
Yeah,
but, they're just... and they actually have a little bit of history of movies because of Tommy Quadrophenia.
Yeah.
He's always been into movie stuff, and he's always had a number of aborted projects that could have turned into movies. But
and again, they were one of the first really to do that whole rock opera thing and then try to turn it into another medium.
Yeah, well, I think there are arguments for groups like the Pretty Things and others that have tried to do similar long form stuff that they called later rock operas. I think Tommy is the first.
Ogden's Nut Gone Flake.
Ogden's Nut Gone Flake. I think Tommy could be considered the first true rock opera as opposed to extended conceptual piece.
Certainly the first one that was performed in actual opera houses in Europe.
Yeah, and seen as a serious piece of work in that respect. It had a libretto. It had a full story worked out. It had those parts. It works better, I find, as a Broadway show now. I think Pete ironed out the issues with it on that, but from a story perspective. But yeah, and there was a case to say that he'd worked on it earlier when he did A Quick One, which is like the 10-minute track on that album, where he did 3 songs put together in a kind of a mini opera. It was his kind of trial run. But yeah. Anyway, the movie Tommy's we could have a whole day talking about that, but that's where Keith infamously, of course, met Oliver Reed, and who became his drinking buddy in crime for years. Poor world with those two, and then Ringo joined in because Keith tried to have an acting career. He was in Stardust, which is a great movie.
Mm-hmm.
He plays the drummer in the band at the holiday camp with Dave Edmunds and other people like that. And then I think, wasn't he in another movie with like 4 vignette type roles? I can't remember. So he tried. Roger obviously had his career with Mick Vicker and films like that. So they were a little bit tied up with the movie world. Anyway, so but concert experiences. So Legalize, my friend. I know you've got a few. What was your first Who gig that you went to?
Oh my first Who gig was the first farewell tour in '82, and me and some friends of all my friends in high school, there was a group of maybe like 5 or 8 of us. All of us were Who fans to one degree or another. Some of us quite, deeply into it. Myself probably be called the biggest fanatic of the bunch, but it's not like the others weren't trying either. And so we all went up to Shea Stadium to go see this show. And at the last minute, The Clash had been added to the bill. Now, The Clash had just played their own show at Shea Stadium, which is out on CD now. I think it came out a year or 2 ago. So basically the entire stadium, the Clash fans had already seen The Clash literally 3 days earlier. So there weren't any Clash fans I'm sure there were some Clash fans, but the majority of them were there to see the Who, right? They didn't give a shit about this band called The Clash. That was combat rock time period. So the Clash were big. They were all over MTV, all over the radio. They were not insignificant. The other opening acts were the Hooters, which was a local Philadelphia band that had like a couple of songs that got some regional airplay, but never made it big nationally.
The Hooters had a couple of hits nationally.
Yeah.
It's the same Hooters.
Yeah, it is. And I think the Pretenders were also on the bill.
Yeah, good.
It's a bit fuzzy on the memory there.
Nice bill.
But man, it was general admission down on the grass. Everybody was getting crushed up front. And several
Yes,
times
they do.
during the concert, Pete Townsend had to stop, say like, "Oh, all you people have to step back. You're crushing the people up front." You know, Cincinnati was only 3 years previously when people have
Yeah.
been crushed at the entrance, rushing into the show. So they were aware of, you know, people getting squished up at the front of this general admission area on the grass. And the thing was, even though I loved the band and I enjoyed seeing the Clash. It was the first time I'd seen the Clash, but the Clash were being disrespected by the crowd, who was extremely rowdy and shit-faced. They were all like really drunk.
Really
Everybody was
shit-faced,
drunk.
yeah.
One of my friends was so drunk that he passed out in the parking lot and didn't even go into the concert. So it was like a huge negative concert going experience for me, even though I was there to see my favorite band. Contrast that with my best Who concert experience, where I saw them in '99 at the House of Blues in Chicago, 1,200 person capacity maximum. It was a benefit concert to raise money for this children's orphanage. I don't know, there's no adult orphanages, right? So it raised money for an orphanage in the area. And it was a charity
If there
that
is, where do I sign up?
it was a charity that Pete had been involved with, and basically saying, you know, I'm going to go play this show. And it was like 3 days before they were to go play in Vegas. And he's like, you know, why don't you guys just come and join me and raise extra money for the charity? So they did a Friday and Saturday show. I went to both. The Friday one was better. And it was me and my friend Lauren who helped me get a ticket for the show. And then the front stage. And we were just like about 3 feet away from Roger Daltrey. It's not a huge stage. We're just to the John side of Roger. And I have a video clip of 5:15 from that show on my YouTube channel. That's like a crappy
try and play a bit of that
VHS
later.
rip, but it has an amazing Entwistle bass solo in it, and for 5:15, and that whole show was just from start to finish, just like one giant musical orgasm, and everybody in that venue was clearly a big Who fan. We were all there to see them and nobody else.
Yeah. That 5:15 solo, I mean, I've seen John playing it live, but when I saw them after he died in future tours, I love the fact that they put that up on the screen in the middle of the song, so the rest of the band would walk off or sit down, and they'd play that at just the right point to fit into the song, and to play the whole of that on video as a tribute to him. And I always appreciated that, you know.
I think that's the one with the camera on the fret.
Yeah, that one.
I think that's from the Royal Albert Hall performance.
Yeah, that's a gig I would love to have been at. But it's funny you mentioned the Clash. I would love to have seen that lineup. Because when I saw the Who in '82, the support act was Graham Parker and the Rumour, who I was quite into at the time. This was in, I've got the ticket, still have the ticket. Can't really see it in the glare, but, you know, Birmingham National Exhibition, 1982. But when I saw them in 1994 in Glasgow, it was Joe Strummer and the Mescaleros for the support. So I kind of half saw them with the Clash. And that was my favourite ever Who gig. I know it was 1994, but John was still around, and it was the Greatest Hits live tour, and I've never had such a good night at a Who gig. It was just phenomenal. They didn't want to leave. Roger wouldn't leave the stage at the end. He stayed for 15 minutes and talked to people and shook hands, and crowd all the way out of the arena just kept chanting, Who. You could hear them for miles. It was just a very warm gig. And my wife, who's never been a huge Who fan, agreed to go to that one. And she was like, my God, I didn't know they were this good. Pete was like,
at House of Blues, people were calling out all these obscure songs, right, to have them play. And Pete just went up to the microphone. He's like, you know, I love it when you guys call out all those songs, because I just think to myself, they've got all the albums.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Like my first, is not to dominate the conversation, and my apologies, but I have a ticket for my second ever Who gig. This is at the Edinburgh Playhouse, standing room only. This is 1981, 20th of February 1981. I could only get standing room. You had to line up to get tickets in those days. They were gone within. But I don't have a ticket from the first Who gig because it was the first tour they did after Keith died, and they announced a very short notice, announced a tour, and they played the Edinburgh Odeon Cinema. And I had enough bus money to get into the city because I lived outside Edinburgh. Never a ticket, and I stood outside, and the gig started, and I kept knocking on the door, and the roadies would come out and I'd say, "I'll give you £10, which is all I had in the world, if you'll let me in." Can't do it, mate. Can't do it, mate. Can't do it. Eventually, after about 30 minutes, one of them came out and said, "Right, fuck it, in you go." So I was very grateful. I don't know who he was, but to this day I'm grateful. So I had to go upstairs and stand at the back of the circle, though, upstairs in the balcony. But it was just magic. It's just no. And then I had an 8-mile walk home, so because I didn't have any money left. But that was my first Who experience. It was the first tour with Kenny Jones, but it was still a magical experience. So I've seen them many times since, and Roger and Tommy, the musical. But you, Toxic, you said you've seen the musical and you've seen the Who live.
Yeah. So we saw them in the mid to early 2000s, and it was one of the tours where they had everything. So they had extra people there. They had strings. They had choir. Did stuff that they put on more of the musical performance of Tommy. And things through there. It was a tremendous experience that I would not trade for the world, because Roger Daltrey has one of those voices that's just completely amazing. I know that Freddie Mercury had done an actual operatic album, and it's something I wondered if Roger Daltrey had the range of the voice, if he'd put his mind to it, he could do something like that as well. Maybe not in the same range.
I think he's more of a blues shouter screamer than possibly an opera.
Than stuff from there. Yeah. But he had such range and things around there. I always wanted him to kind of branch out and try something else and see what he can do from there. But it was in itself a surreal moment, because you're at one of those bands that defined musical history and has all of these songs that made it mainstream, and all of these songs that people saying and they just don't know who it was, of any age, and commercials are using their songs and all those kind of things from there. But it was the closest I've ever come to having a perfect musical experience at a live concert.
It's cool. Yeah, it's very cool.
I mean, it's just, I'm probably 6 rows back. I mean, with general admission as we're going out and seeing all that stuff from there. And when I go to a live show of anything, comedian, hockey, when I go see hockey or any of that stuff from there, and you get close enough to these people, you realize that they are human like you are. They just have an incredible talent that they're displaying. And there's a respect for them performing and sharing that talent with you. I told you off stage when we were talking earlier about the Stomp experience that I had with the family at that performance, and the performer engaged with us towards the end, and I pushed to engage back, and then they went on and did another hour and a half. Beyond what they normally do. And what I was able to enjoy with that I didn't get at this Tommy setting, because they wanted to do some more things, but the crowd really wasn't into it, and things from there. So I think my experience in seeing them live, I wish that I had done it earlier with people who were more into the performance, and they weren't just trying to like check off a bucket list item to go see the Who.
Yeah, you would have heard stuff as well that what I call the CSI Who fans would not necessarily have heard before. You would have heard some of the deeper material, which is some of it's astoundingly good. I mean, songwriting of Pete generally it's incredible. But that's a great experience to have, and it's a slightly different one from going to a full-on rock, like the early days. They were still just full-on volume, as heavy as they could be. So Metallica, I don't think you've seen the Who live, but you must have seen a few performances over the years on YouTube or whatever. What's your impression been of those? What did you come away from?
I've never seen them live, but my music teacher in high school was a big Who fan, so he showed us video clips of like some of their more well-known concerts, like their Woodstock performance and stuff like that. And I would love to have seen these guys in their prime. Like it just looks like an absolutely amazing show. And like you said, they didn't have the ability to do some of the more complicated stuff that they did on their albums. So they just cranked everything to 11 and started blowing everyone's eardrums out through their spine. Yeah. Which that attitude and sound just inspired an entire generation of rock stars after them.
And I think that's where Keith Moon came into the picture a lot as well, is that as well as John filling in a lot of the bits, Keith was like playing everything he could hit. That really filled out the sound. In fact, the comment that Keith, or the interview that Roger does about Keith joining the band, and it was his band at the time, the Detours. In fact, I think I've got a picture here if I can share it. Oops, that's picture toxic. Yeah, the Detours in 1962-ish. I might be wrong on that. This was Roger's band, and they were a kind of instrumental surf band. Played instrumentals, whatever. Roger, you can see him on the right, is the lead guitarist. So their drummer was a guy called Doug Sanborn, and he was seen as too old for the band. And I think he wanted to go off and get a normal job and earn money, because they were all skint, as they say. So they held auditions for a new drummer, and Keith turns up, little guy, dressed entirely in ginger. He had a ginger jumpsuit on, ginger hair, and he was drinking a brown ale. This little ginger thing turns up. He says, I can drum better than any of those guys. Gets up behind the kit and destroys it, like literally. Hits it to death. And it was like the sound of a jet engine starting up behind you. So he was in the band from that point onwards. And I think Pete, over the years, may have had doubts about Keith's ability, because, as I said, he couldn't get Keith to hold down a 4/4 beat. Can you just play 4/4 time? No, couldn't do it. He says, I could not get him to just hold down the beat. He had to do this all the time. Everything had to be, and so he had to build material around that. He couldn't just get him to go,
Well, I mean, that's part of the downside of having a drummer that's that talented, is the drummer also needs to keep time, and a really talented drummer just won't do it because it's boring to him.
And he was unique. He was a unique drummer. So there's no one, I don't recall anyone else being like his drumming style.
The only one I think would be close from that era would be Bill Ward from Black Sabbath.
Yeah, possibly. I think he's even more technically adept than Keith, though, and in terms of being able to play different time signatures.
Yeah.
And I mean, Sabbath, if you look at it, a lot of their material did slow down quite a bit to build up the, they had dark and light, they had shade. Keith was like 100% dark or light. There was not so much shade.
Yeah, there was no shade with him. It was either 100% or nothing.
Yeah, and possibly being slightly unfair there. He had more skill than that than we were admitting, but it was the uniqueness of it. He didn't feel limited by, I'm not going to play a kit with 2 snare drums or whatever. Now, Tom, do you think that there's a particular Muppet may have been based on Keith Moon?
Oh, I'm sure Animal had gotten some influence from somewhere, surely.
Yeah, I always felt that
Animal is Keith Moon. It's not
with a little bit of Phil Taylor from Motorhead in there.
Yeah,
with the wild hair and the name Filthy Animal.
Yeah, but just the style that Animal played in. But
I think Motorhead was post Animal, but yeah,
yeah,
could be wrong.
Yeah, it might be.
But
yes.
Yeah, definitely it was an inspiration.
Keith Moon was definitely a showman, right? I think. He maybe he couldn't keep 4/4 time, but maybe it didn't matter. What mattered is he was putting on a show, right? And when you go to these live events, are you not entertained? Have you been entertained? That's the whole point of it. Did I see a great show? Did I see them having fun? If you go and you've got people in the band that are just standing around, punching buttons and playing guitar, okay, who's going to get into it first? And then with the Who, they were lightning on stage. You had 4 people coming together at a point in time with each of their personalities aligned, each of their talents aligned, and they pushed it. Would Pete had been as wild if you didn't have Keith Moon wild on the drums? I don't know. I don't know. And it's like the Beatles, Boston, Van Halen. I know, I'm sorry, it's probably sacrilege. I have some, but those 4 coming together or 5 coming together at the same time, you just have to respect that, the cosmic nature of that.
Not only that, I don't know.
Go ahead.
I would say, I don't know if you guys touched on this or not, but the Who was kind of almost like a proto-punk band.
Yeah,
yes, absolutely, and
especially when you hear songs like "Generation" and stuff like that. I mean, that's punk all the way. I mean, if you
that definitely is.
So
it's straight up like exactly what punk turned into, and they were doing it in '65.
Yeah, going back to that early material, the My Generation and subsequent 2 or 3 albums and the singles they made then, those are far more punk than what they became as a band, which was more hard rock. They were a very schizophrenic band. I mean, they started with that mod thing because Pete Mead and their original manager really wanted to push that. The sort of the mods were all into R&B and soul and the clothes and whatever. I think they never quite felt 100% comfortable in that, but that music they made out of that was very much punkish. Those cutting Rickenbacker guitars, whatever.
Especially in comparison to what the Beatles and the Stones were doing. I mean, the Stones were leaning a little more into that, but they were still more of your classic R&B rock kind of,
rock, yeah. And I think Pete Mead said to them at the time, their first manager, because at the time the Detours and then the Who were really Rolling Stones clones. They were like everyone else playing blues stuff, and that was the British beat boom at the time. They were playing the bluesy stuff. He said, you got to do something different. Here's this mod thing, because he was a mod. Stop these clothes, change your style of playing, get a bit more Motowny or whatever. And then Pete started writing these angsty songs which suited that mod youth thing. So they did differentiate themselves that way, but I think they gradually got pulled back towards rock. They were mods against rockers, and then they became rockers again.
Yeah, they definitely. Yeah, once you hit the 70s era, they kind of came back around to that. Well, not even really came back around, but they just kind of adopted that.
Yeah, they'd worn those clothes. And I think an interesting comment, but I can't remember the guy's name, but one of the leading mods in London said, I knew the mod movement was over in 1966 when I was in St. James, whatever club in London, and I saw Pete in a caftan. So I knew mod was done. So Pete was wearing a caftan. They went and did the little psychedelic era. And then they said, screw it, it's boiler suits and heavy rock from now on.
Yeah, that was kind of an interesting thing, and like went from like the mod era to like then the psychedelic rock era in like the late '60s, early '70s, and then you had punk come out in '76 with the Ramones, and it was just we were off to the races.
Right. Well, then you had the other side of it too, where Led Zeppelin obviously pulled a lot of, I don't know how much inspiration, but you can definitely tell that that's kind of when I think dealing with that as far as like competition, that's probably where the Who was like, okay, now we got to assert ourselves a little bit more. And they went more to that kind of sound as well, because, the vocals that's the thing that between Led Zeppelin and Who that stand out for me is their vocals, right? In comparison to the other guys. I mean, the Beatles were the Beatles. They were very great musicians, great writers, but as far as singers, outside of Paul, ain't nobody going to say that John is an amazing fucking singer. Right. I mean,
it's the way the two of them harmonized.
Exactly.
That made the Beatles
right.
good.
As opposed to
individually, they're not so great.
Yeah, as opposed to the Who or Led Zeppelin, who had very strong leaders in the vocals.
And it's interesting you mentioned Zeppelin, Tom, because they both Plant and Daltrey adopted that long blonde hair, bare chested,
and they really started that whole like hairband kind of voice too. If you think about it, that thing that nobody else had really done before. Yeah,
it became a bit of an archetype from that. And I think the two were in definite competition, especially live. Those two
I'd like to
bands
think so. I would like to think that they kind of pushed each other. Yeah.
Yeah, they dominated the live circuit globally in those years between 69 and 76, those two bands. And I think they were constantly trying to outdo each other. I know that, and I think it was Toxic or Legalized, and I were talking about this, that Pete has recently said, I was never a big fan of Led Zeppelin. Love the guys, never liked the band, which is interesting. Maybe a little bit of...
Well, if you think about it, Zeppelin, in long hindsight, they weren't as original as the Who were, if you stop to think about it. But yeah.
Well, Led Zeppelin was more of a rhythm and blues band.
Well, I'm just saying, they've been kind of busted in latter years here for pretty much ripping off other music.
Yeah, and I felt the Who went more towards a hard rock, heavy, proto-heavy metal direction as opposed to blues-based. They could do the blues stuff, but they always ended up, like Summertime Blues, absolutely hammering it as if it was a hard rock.
Yes, Young Man Blues as well.
Brought in that era of the 80s, like with that, what is it, that harpsichord thing they use for like Teenage Wasteland and stuff like that on that. What the hell's that thing called?
So Baba O'Reilly, they actually...
Baba O'Reilly, yeah.
Wasn't it Dave Swarbeck played the violin on that? He's from Fairport Convention.
Yeah, but that thing they have was that cranky thing that goes the do 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 do, that thing. Like that kind of was like
it's an organ. It's
like an organ of some type.
Organ.
But to me, that kind of was a precursor to a lot of the electronic kind of sound we got out of the 80s, right? If you listen to that, it really does kind of precursor to that in a way. It feels very
right, Tom. Yeah.
Well, I mean,
a lot of electronic bands cited that material. Well, no, but that's okay because a lot of those electronic bands did cite that,
and they were pioneering that sound at the time. Because
I wish I knew what that was called. It's like
it's a synthesizer,
sequencer or something.
So you have to play the bit and then you sequence it all and make it repeat the different bits. So
well, they actually had the little thing where he pulled the crank on stage, didn't he, or was that just for show?
It might have been for show, but although it could be. But the great thing about that was that they didn't just play it like a keyboard; he made a different sound with it.
And like it said, Tom, like this was much more an '80s sound, and they were doing this in '71 with Bob O'Reilly and Who's Next,
because it was even more advanced than when they did start bringing in electric organs and stuff into the music, like the sound you heard from the Doors in comparison, right? Like that old,
that was a very Hammond organ.
Exactly, the Hammond organ sound, right? In comparison, yeah.
So what's even more interesting is it's more innovative than you realize, because those organ parts that Pete came up with, he started with data from his spiritual guru Mera Baba, like things revolving around his birthday and things like that. So he took numbers associated with his guru's biography and used them to compose the sequences. So it's a very, very early example of algorithmically generated music. Now, that's what he used as the basis. And then, of course, he evolved it in the studio as he was working with the parts. But his idea was that the music would be a direct representation of it's a transformation of data from his spiritual guru's life, taking biographical data. And this was the whole basis of Lifehouse, of how we probably don't have time to go into everything about Lifehouse, but his idea was that raw information about people would be used to generate a musical score that is unique to that individual, and then all the individuals would come together in a big virtual environment and create a harmony of humanity.
Basically prefacing the network and internet in a sense.
Yeah.
He actually predicted that connectivity. Yeah.
Well, then you go that step farther with Won't Get Fooled Again, and how they use it in there is really like that song could have dropped in 1986, 1993, 2001, and it probably would have been just as popular and sounded just as relevant then. Just the sound that they managed to pull out of that, so far advanced in it sounds like it's a digital song almost if you listen to it outside of the guitar and the drums, right? But it's not. It's all it's all like I mean, it's just amazing how they were able to pull that off way back when.
So that song's an interesting one, and it is obviously one of everybody's favourites that loves The Who. It has every element of The Who in it. It's got that synthesizer, sequencer, keyboard. It's got the screamed vocal from Roger. It's got the huge power chords and riffs from Pete. And it's got that break in the middle, which then Keith comes in on that drumming and builds it up until the scream and the guitar. Perfect Who song. I mean, it was a perfectly constructed song. Showed everything that was great about them, I think.
Oh yeah. If you've never had a chance to watch it, there's videos on YouTube. It's a bonus material from the Kids Are All Right DVD with Entwistle's isolated bass track for both Won't Get Fooled Again and for Baba O'Reilly. And when you watch him play the bass in isolation, you realize how much was going on under the big stuff there's the flashy stuff going on up top. And then there's Entwistle underneath doing things that you experience, and you know it's there when you hear it, but it's kind of subconscious, and it's creating a texture down in the bass range that unless you were a bass player or specifically trying to hear that, it kind of gets a little bit lost, but not really lost in the sense it's there. You can always hear it. Once you hear it and pay attention to it, then when you play the full song, you can hear it every time you want to. But it's amazing how much was going on underneath, so to speak.
I'd just like to take a quick break to say hello to some people in the chat. Thanks for sticking with us, everybody, and being here. And your comments have been fantastic. I really appreciate you guys. So Darius, my brother in arms, is here. Hopefully he might pop in later as well. Say hello. Commander Ed Straker, Shadow, always appreciate your comments, Commander. You mentioned about the struggle of the tug of war in Quadrophenia, and we're going to talk about that in a little while because that's one of the albums I really love most. And the Deep Purple stuff, I think I wouldn't disagree with you. I think the thing about The Who was they never claimed to be a keyboard band, but Pete was very interested in experimenting with those particular uses of synthesizers. I don't think that in any way they could say they replicated John Lord's keyboard work, which was far more extensive. I think what Pete was trying to do was a little bit more niche. We got Lord Thoth, D-Bird Martin, 32 Flavors of Nick Visor, our big buddy. Good to see you, buddy. Hopefully you get home in time to pop in for a little while too. Mags is here, our great friend Mags. Lovely to see you. Dragon Master, and probably some people I mentioned earlier, but Lord Thoth, hockey, yes.
Absolutely. Go
That's why I'm
Bruins.
wearing a Dallas Stars hat, because that's the anti-hockey. So we're going down some good route here. I think though I want to just introduce. I want you to talk about Keith a little more. For various
Before you do
reasons.
that, I hate to say I do got to run.
No, I'm
tried to
sorry.
stay
I've
as
locked
long
the
as I could.
door. Locked the doors.
I know. I
Tom's
wish I
not
could
allowed
stick
out.
around. I love talking music and stuff, but
Oh, come back.
I got a show to get ready for and some other things I got to deal with
I
ahead
know,
of
buddy.
time. So
Well, you and I will do something like this again soon, don't we?
if it was any other day of the week, it might be easier for me. So
I'll do the next one another day. Especially now Gary's doing stuff on Mondays. It's
yeah, and usually like sometimes Tuesdays, but otherwise generally it seems like Thursdays and sometimes Saturday and Sundays work better for me. But hey, yeah, just let me know if not. And yeah, because any day we have the main show, those are hellacious days. So
well, I do appreciate you being here, though. Thanks, Tom.
I appreciate you having me.
Just is it a Midnight's Edge After Dark tonight?
That's tomorrow night. Yep, every
Tomorrow
Tuesday
night.
and Thursday at 6 Central. And then we have the morning show Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at
You got anything
11
going
a.m.
on-
Central.
Anything going on tonight?
We got Toxic Femme coming up here in a couple
Toxic
hours. That's
Femme.
what I got to get ready for here. So, yep.
Well, we'll head there later, I'm sure.
Sounds good. Take care, guys, and enjoy
Take
the
care,
rest of the
buddy.
stream.
Thanks for coming in.
Yeah, no
You bet.
problem.
Good to
Later.
see you,
Good
mate.
to finally
chatting with
stream
you,
with you.
Tom.
Yeah, nice meeting you.
Yeah, and just to play Tom out, I'll give him some music. There's a minimum we can get away with without getting copyright struck.
Yeah.
So yeah, I want to talk about Keith a little. I know we've delved into some deeply. We're kind of getting a little more into the music side of the Who, which is great. I want to talk about the five moments of Keith that I think we should talk about. So this could be a bit fun too. Not that I am condoning behavior such as wrecking hotel rooms, but let's talk about Keith. So I will find the appropriate video file. Well, look, you probably even see my screen here. Hang on, the Keith montage, right? Are you ready for Keith?
Follow the yellow brick road. What's your name?
Keith.
Keith?
My friends call me Keith. You can call me John.
Okay, John.
Nobody played like Keith Moon before. Everybody kind of, and he.
I got that one, which I played in the main montage. I want you to play it again because I love that bit where he's playing along with John's bass solo in My Generation. But I have another equally good one. We're going to do the top 5 moments of Keith. Where's it going? I renamed this the wrong name. Aha! There's a glitch in the Matrix. Just give me a second.
The yellow brick.
No, okay. What did I do with my top 5? I'm going to go look that for this one that I'm looking for. I think I've renamed it the wrong thing. You guys talk amongst yourselves for 2 minutes if you don't mind.
Absolutely. No, I love that we get both sides of Keith here too, because you have Keith, the musician, who's brilliant and just a genius at his instrument, and then you have Keith, the person, who's just an absolute train wreck of a human being.
Yes, that is the part of it, and that's why I say I don't condone some of the behavior, but it's certainly worth talking about. It's quite interesting.
And everybody like kind of like rips on Ozzy or Motley Crue for that kind of behavior, and like, oh, that was the rule back then rather than the exception. Like all rock bands were like this.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, certainly if you got big enough. You couldn't get away with it if you were a small act, but if you were a big headlining act, then you could get away with it because, the venues, they needed you to come back and stuff. So, it's a weird reciprocating relationship where they put up with all that excessive behavior because they were making so much money, millions and millions of dollars from these tours. And because there's that much money being pulled in, there were hotels that were known to take rock and roll guests and assign them to their shittiest room in the entire hotel, knowing that it would get trashed. And then that would give them the excuse to remodel that room on somebody else's dime, right? Because it's not like they just trash the room and leave. They are responsible for the damages. So they end up having to pay for all that. It's one reason the Who didn't get quote unquote rich until much later in their careers, because they had all these expensive bills to pay from all their excesses.
Right. But I mean, signing a major label and things never guaranteed that you were going to get rich anyway. I mean, the story of one band after another of their excess and giving that stuff away. And you look at MC Hammer, who had one of the largest runaway hits of all time. And a year later, he was broke because he just gave all that away with Posse and everybody else he had from there. So,
well, it's like hitting the lottery for some of these rock stars, right? They didn't know. It's easy to manage your money when you don't have any of it.
Yeah, because you know that you're not going to be able to buy that. But when it all shows up and all your dreams are right there in front of you, and anything you can get, that's what you go after.
Yeah, I think it's
like football players
worse.
And things the same way.
I think it's the hardest when not only does the money show up, but it shows up all at once in a big flood, right? Now you haven't built up your money managing incrementally as you started earning more and more money. It's suddenly you're a millionaire overnight.
Yeah.
I found the file. I'd renamed it the wrong name. I spent a lot of time making these. So this is my top 5 Keith Moon adventures, I'll call them. And let's see if you guys agree that these are the top 5 or if I've missed any of the big ones. And there are a lot, let's face it. So look at these fantastic graphics. Number 5, Keith passes out behind the kit.
Oh my.
This is at the Cow Palace in California in 1972 or something?
73.
73.
Quadrophenia tour.
Keith, before the gig, apparently took a horse tranquilizer or two to calm himself down because he was a bit nervous or whatever for the gig. There are some talk it was his girlfriend gave it to him, but and he goes out and he plays the gig and he doesn't play particularly well and he gets through quite a few songs, like 15 songs in, and he collapses over the kit during.
I don't even think it was. I think it was more like 3 songs.
Yeah, so their plane won't get fooled again, and you know the bit with the big drum bit where he's supposed to come in, nothing happens. The band turn around, look around, drum kit's empty. He's fallen over and collapsed. So they finish the song without him, no drumming. They go off, come back on half an hour later, he's with them. They sit back, he sits back behind the kit and they play Magic Bus. And they're getting to the end of that song and that's what happens. He collapses over the kit, they drag him off. Much to the delight and lifelong memory for this guy, Scott Halpern, 19-year-old drummer. Pete says, is there a drummer in the house? And this guy puts his hand up, steps up on the stage and finishes the gig with the Who. And what a memory to treasure. He got to play almost an entire set with the Who.
Wow.
And apparently played brilliantly. So good for you,
At 19 years old too. So this kid's, you know, all his birthdays just came at once that day.
Yeah, I think he's got a website up and he does talk about it. But he's like, I cannot believe I got to play with the Who because Keith was unconscious backstage. So it's one of those Keith moments, you know. He's slumped over the drums. The roadies have to carry him off. And
so I wonder how like you even do a show like that, because like I wouldn't be able to get past in my head of just I'm playing with the fucking Who right now. What?
That's right. I mean, talk about nerves, you know. But apparently he played a blinder, and this gig is available on YouTube. It's all black and white. Cow Palace, and apparently the support band, one of the support bands was Leonard Skinner, but their drummer said they asked him if you'd go out and play with them. He said, "I'd love to, but I don't know any of your songs." So, but this guy was a Who fan, so he knew them. So good for him.
Yeah, that was definitely.
Before we leave this picture. Take a look at how Keith's drum kit is arranged. All the drums are low, and that's so that you can see Keith when he's playing. This comes back to they're all fighting for this. 4 guys all fighting for attention, and if you look at most drummers' drum kits, they have the tom-toms and whatnot. They have them angled up. And sometimes you can't see the drummer at all behind their kit. Yes, whereas Keith Moon, everything is angled low, so to make sure that he could be seen. Yeah.
Well, you know, Ringo used to laugh that he used to, because he got so many death threats in the Beatles, he used to turn his cymbals up like this so they would cover him completely just in case some lunatic took a shot at him.
Well, I mean, and you see guys like, you know, Neil Peart from Rush, where he's literally buried in a freaking drum kit.
How does he get into that drum kit?
I think part of it comes like hinges, and you have to like, get into it, and then the stagehands would shut it.
They'd have to lower him down on a, you know, like.
Well, like, you know, he's got like a 75-piece drum kit.
Well, nowadays they also have cameras so that you can see him play, even though he's obscured by his kit, right? Which they didn't have back then, cameras and screens and everything.
So that's number 5. Moving on to number 4, eventually, if this video decides to play. Oh, there we go. Keith loves to dress up. And the particular one I love, and it's his performance as Blackbeard, played by Robert Newton, which is actually legalizes Avatar today. He's got the hat, he's got the parrot, and he could do the accent brilliantly. If you've ever seen that movie, Blackbeard, the pirate movie. So he was a big fan of Robert Newton. He used to go around, you know, whatever. But he loved to dress up as a jester. He would dress up as a toff with a top hat. He did the S&M sequence, which I think is in The Kids Are All Right, where he's got the leather gear and he's getting whipped by some woman. It's the guy. Keith loved to dress up, so had nothing to
Consummate
do with the
showman.
music. He was.
You-
He loved attention.
And good point that Legalized brought up. They all four did, right? That you got that
Yeah.
the lightning in a bottle that hit, and they were just showmen. And
Yeah.
you knew you were going to have a good time because when they were on stage, they were all having a good time.
They also this tension and competition between them, which sometimes would literally break out into a fist fight. But this dynamic between the four of them, Keith and John kind of palled around together, but Roger didn't really pal around with any of them, and Pete wanted to fit in with Keith and John, but didn't quite. And so they're like four guys that are angry at each other, and in the early period, this is true for sure, but it results in a tension and an intensity that comes out in their music. And I don't think if they were all good friends, I don't think we would have gotten any good music out of them.
That's a very good
Roger and Pete became friends much later in life, but they came to fist blows at times.
Well, Roger was thrown out of the band for punching Pete on stage, and he had to apologize and promise he'd never do it again before they would let him back in.
I did not
He
know
himself had walked off the stage before as well, because the rest were all fucking about. So, but yeah, the four of them were very different. I was going to talk about the Quadrophenia section later, but very, very different personalities.
Keith got kicked out briefly as well for, popping too much speed when they were in their mod phase.
We've all done that.
That was back when Roger was nominally the leader of the band.
That's another advance on the punk movement, because they were big into speed too. So they were getting ahead of the. So that's Keith dressing up was always good for fun. Did it a lot in various scenes, and particularly his Robert Newton impression. He could have been Robert Newton. They could have cast him. But number 3, I feel, is the opposite of that. It's Keith undressing, because he liked to do that too. And this particular occasion is on the Russell Harty chat show sometime in the early 70s, where he decided he would strip. But not only that, he then turned to Pete and he ripped every bit of Pete's clothing off, arm by arm, ripped the shirt off, and Pete said, "Leave me alone, stop it." And eventually they had to end things because it was getting down to underwear. But he just couldn't sit still there and do an interview. He had to rip everything off. And there's also the famous photo, which I can't find now on the internet. It's been scrubbed, of Keith doing his tribute to Burt Reynolds' Playgirl spread.
Oh, the nude bellboy picture,
the nude bellboy. So he didn't have the greatest body. He was a bit of a slob, but he loved to strip off. So bless his soul.
Just like 70s rock fan.
Just like me, yes. Although I've got a much better body. Number 2 for me in the Keith moments of all time is Keith blowing up his drums, which we saw a little bit earlier. And this has the infamous Smothers Brothers performance, where he blows his drum kit up. Now, this was always meant to happen, but what the roadies would normally do is put just a flashbang, as they called them. Maybe 1, maybe 2 in the drum kit, and it would just go boom, and there'd be a bit of smoke and whatever. But throughout the day, Keith was egging them on, different roadies. Oh, yeah, it's not enough. You need to put more in. You need to put some more in. And he'd go and put more in as well. So by the end of the show, when it went boom, it really went boom and blew the bass drum up entirely. Scared the shit out of the audience, but not only that, Pete caught the full blast of it, and it deafened him in one ear, and it actually ruined his hearing in that ear forever.
That'll happen.
He absolutely screwed up Pete's hearing, which I don't know how Pete forgave him for that, but so he did like blowing things up, toilets, televisions, you name it, which must have got a bit irritating when you lived with him, I guess, but that's a different story, his domestic life. Not a man to be proud of domestically, but... So anyway, that was number 2. But number 1, Well, there can be only one, and we do need to talk about this story because is it true or isn't it? So apparently Roger claimed, no, everybody claimed, including Keith, that he'd driven his Rolls Royce into his swimming pool. And indeed, there are many photoshopped pictures showing Rolls Royces in his swimming pool, this being one of them. And Oasis recreated it for one of their album covers as well. They did the same stunt in the same pool. But did this actually happen is the question. So
Well, all of them say it did, but
so I'm gonna.
Was it his swimming pool, or I thought it was a hotel swimming pool?
Well,
I've heard hotel swimming pool.
This is it. The story grows.
See, the story I remember is it's Keith's 21st birthday in Flint, Michigan, and it's the same incident where he knocked out his front tooth. He slipped on they had a huge birthday cake that had marzipan icing all over it, and he slipped on the marzipan icing and knocked his front tooth out. And that's the same night where the car ended up in the pool.
Well, that is one story. There's another story that it was other people say it was the Rolls Royce. Now, apparently he did drive his he couldn't drive as well. He didn't have a license, not till much later. He did apparently drive his Rolls Royce into a field and he got stuck there. But this article from Music Radar, did Keith Moon drove a Rolls Royce into a swimming pool on this day in 1967, or did he? Now, this was in August 2021, and he would have been 75 then. Isn't that amazing to think he would have been 76 this year? Incredible. But his 21st birthday in 1967. This is the Flint, Michigan story. So they were supporting Herman's Hermits. Can you believe that? The Who were supporting Herman's Hermits. They used to put these weird packages out. They have the Monkees supporting Jimi Hendrix or the other way around and whatever. This is another one of the weird ones. So apparently Moon says, and other people say, he drove a car into this pool at the Holiday Inn. Lincoln Continental, though, not a Rolls Royce. And apparently he says he was stuck under the water, managed to get out. But the bit that I found particularly interesting, and I'll see if I can expand it, is the story grew. The Lincoln became a Rolls Royce, and the Rolls in the swimming pool has since become a mainstay of rock mythology, a perfect image of rock and roll excess. Now, Oasis recreated the image for a cover of the third album, Be Here Now, but did it actually happen? Even the people who were there aren't sure. DJ Peter Kavanagh of WTAC Radio was at the party. I heard the ruckus, he said. I went outside and the first thing I saw was the vehicle in the pool. We all had several beers and some other stuff too, so things can get a little cloudy, but I clearly remember seeing the vehicle in the pool. However, Barry Whitwam, the drummer for Herman's Hermits, remembers differently. There was no car in the pool, only all the pool tables and chairs, and Keith never came back dripping of water. Peter Noon of Herman's Hermits says this never happened. He would just tell stories and he forgot what happened. By all accounts, though, Herman's Hermits were hit with a bill for $25,000 for new carpets, wallpapers, and ceilings by Holiday Inn. Should never have stayed at the same hotel as the Who.
Nope.
Now, that's just a bad idea.
It is a bad idea. You're going to get stuck with that bill whether you like it or not. The Who's Roger Daltrey, however, remembers it differently. I saw it, he says. We paid the bill for the damages. It was $50,000. It's vague now, but I just remember the car in the pool. But then I read in the biography Dear Boy by Tony Fletcher that it never happened. So maybe I've been living someone else's life. I just don't know. And his bandmate John Entwistle disagreed. He never drove a car into the swimming pool. He couldn't even drive. So there you go. Did it happen or didn't it happen?
The story that I remember was that the car ended up in the pool, but Keith was not the one driving.
Right.
It was just a huge party that got out of hand.
Keith claims he did.
They got banned from all the Holiday Inns. To never be allowed to stay there again after this incident too.
That's right.
Which that takes some doing to get banned from a Holiday Inn. That's
Holiday
go
Inn
above and beyond.
Holiday Inn is now kind of a low rent kind of shithole hotel chain, but back then it wasn't.
Well, there is a particular image of that I need to try and find. Forgive me if
I did find the photo of him as the bellboy. I put the link in the
Oh,
the
right,
nude
yeah.
reclined on
You
the
found
couch.
it, good, because I could not find it. I'm looking for the photo of Keith standing in front of the Holiday Inn.
Holiday Inn marquee. It says like "Happy Birthday,
Yes,
Keith" or
happy
something like
birthday. I
that.
found it. I just found it. Yeah, hang on. So yes, the whether it's the same Keith or not, I don't know.
I think it is.
Yeah. So here's here he is standing in front of Holiday Inn. Happy birthday, Keith. And this was probably just before he blew up that sign.
Yeah, probably.
So let me open that other one. Yeah, sorry. So now I'm not condoning any of this activity. Trust me. But no, do you think? I think
You're
this
just
is,
reporting what might have happened.
Yeah, this isn't totally nude. We can get away with this.
I mean, he's nude, but the naughty bits are not visible.
Now, this first Who gig I went to that I sneaked into, I bought the program of it, and this was the centerfold in the program.
Yeah,
because you used to buy programs.
This is what was in the tour program for.
Yeah.
Was it 76 or 74?
Yeah, and they were still selling those in 79, 80 at the gigs. They said they had copies to sell. But this is the Bellboy Baggage of the Month. That's funny.
From
Anyway.
from the beard look, I'm gonna say that was 76.
Yeah.
But it's hard to say.
I think you're right. That was a 76 tour, but they kept selling those programs. I don't have that program anymore. Somebody stole it from me. So
I think I've got one around somewhere.
they stole it because they obviously they were fapping to it, but anyway, but that's my top 5 Keith moments. I'm sure
So
there are
you
thousands
mentioned
of others.
Herman's Hermits in there, and 67 was the tour where they were the opening act for Herman's Hermits. And if you've ever heard any Herman's Hermits, I can't imagine an opening act more incongruous than the Who, even at this time.
The 8th I am, Henry the 8th I am.
Yeah, because they're in their auto destruction phase at this point, where they're smashing up their gear at the end of the show.
And Peter Noon singing, something tells me I'm into something.
Yeah, so 1967. Imagine the most conservative place you can imagine in the United States, which is in Utah in 1967. Herman's Hermits play Lagoon, which is an amusement park here with like roller coasters and everything. It's not known as a concert venue, but I guess in 67, there weren't many places you could play a rock concert. So Herman's Hermits is playing at Lagoon, which totally fits with the family friendly nature of Lagoon, right? But the Who is the opening act. And I've been living here for 30 years in Utah, and I've been trying to meet somebody who was at that show to find out what it was like.
Find out who they were there for.
Well, almost certainly they were there for Herman's Hermits, right? So
what's interesting, legalized, though, is that I've seen reports or interviews with the Who and Herman's Hermits who said, yeah, Herman's Hermits were a completely different kind of band, but my God, they could drink too. And knew at a party because they were young guys. They just were a very different band. So behind the scenes, they got on okay. It was musically a mess. Yeah.
What is it? What was it like for somebody in the audience? They go to see Herman's Hermits, and then there's this band, the Who, that I don't know, it's 67, so maybe they heard "I Can See for Miles," right?
Yeah, which was their biggest US hit ever, I think, wasn't it?
And that's it would have been what was playing on the radio in 67 when they go on tour.
Right. That would be the only 45 of the Who that my father had was Miles and Miles, right?
Yeah.
So it's a totally different marketplace once you come over to the US, and there's a totally different music scene. Once you came over, there was all formulaic. You were getting the Archies and all that kind of stuff at that time.
Well,
right?
you had an FM AM split in America, which we didn't really have in Britain. So you would have rock stuff on FM, pop stuff on AM, and there would be a difference. Britain, it was all kind of still mixed together as pop. So you had a different set. So if you're listening to Herman's Hermits on AM, you're not going to be hearing the Who on FM.
Right, and it depended on where you lived as to whether or not you had strong AM radio, and FM, just wasn't as prevalent. So on the coast, you got better and things there, but in the Midwest and Southwest and The South, you did not. It was more AM, and you got more
Yeah, I
of the
don't think
bubblegum type
FM
stuff.
becomes nationwide until the the 70s with album-oriented rock format.
Correct. Yeah,
But
and
I
then
mean,
it
I
kind of
could
spread like
see-
wildfire.
I could see a case though where some people would hear certain Who singles on the radio, like Substitute or I Can See for Miles, and kind of say, well, it's a little bit like that Herman's Hermits, in the sense that it was AM, you couldn't hear it very well if it was on AM. You
Well,
know,
except for
it's-
my generation, Pete was writing pop songs to get into the
did.
charts to get, because frankly, that was how you would get cash.
Pete had a huge pop sensibility. The whole band did. Their early stuff, a lot of it was very like The Kids Are All Right, one of my favorite songs of all time. It's pure pop.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Albeit
Well,
with
so is I'm a
Rickenbackers.
Boy and Substitute and Can't Explain.
Yeah.
And
Happy
Pictures of
Jack.
Lily, even although the subject matter, once you get into the lyrics, is a little bit out there for a pop song, but they're all structured
of
as
fapping.
2-minute 30 pop songs.
Yeah, the,
so
the
they
whole
were a pop
four
band.
chord thing, right? But that shows the intelligence of Pete. Knew that he needed to make a certain amount of money, and to do that, they had to make multiple markets, and the U.S. was a big market. So they had to make songs there that made them money, that got them airtime, that got them into the tours where the money really was, except for them, how many hotels they destroyed, right? That argument. But
Also, yeah.
no, go ahead.
Also the Who were extremely good, like many bands of the time, at putting great backing vocals on and harmony vocals. So they had that sound in there too with those records, So
I mean, if you listen to Miles and Miles, sorry to interrupt, but if you listen to Miles and Miles, the Turtles, and there's some other bands for that, it all sounds like that. One of the videos that I like on YouTube is by Axis of Awesome, where they go through their 4-chord song and they play a lot of these pop tunes that have been number ones through the year by with those chords and things from there. Pete, I think, saw what was going on, and he's one of they're one of the few bands that had multiple of those that weren't like a factory band coming out of that. And I think he was playing the system to make money to produce the music they wanted to produce.
Yeah, well, that was the aim of the game, to get more people to listen to you. And I think the Who, up till 67, 68, there was no strong distinction between rock and pop anyway.
Yeah.
Right.
It really only developed after things like Tommy and after Sgt. Pepper and it started to be more available.
That's one thing I noticed playing through their early stuff, was that there was a lot to distinguish them from, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, a lot of the stuff that was going on then. And really about the time Tommy comes out is when they really start developing their own sound, and you get the Who.
Yes, that's a fantastic point. Yeah.
With my generation being the one standout.
Yeah.
Yeah, nobody had done anything quite like My Generation. I mean, it was quite a sonic assault, and that bass solo, and then the sort of chaos at the end where it completely changes into a different song. But yeah, they still fit into the British invasion mold in many ways, as Metallica is right. And, the Rickenbacker sound, the Beatles were using Rickenbackers too. There was maybe the Stones sounded a little bit different, but even their mid-60s material, bluesy as some of it was, there was a lot of pop stuff in there too. Like The Last Time, or songs like that.
I would
So-
say
So,
one of the bands.
I hate to do this, but I have really got to go 70. So it's been very nice being here. I wish I could stay for the whole
Doors
thing.
are locked, buddy. You can't go
I
anywhere.
know. But I'm getting the evil eye, and I've got to go and do a few things
Well,
from
I appreciate you being here very much, my friend. Is there anything you wish to plug?
Besides you, no.
Well,
So.
Well, I'm here all the time.
I'm on Twitter, Great TMF. I have a Gilded, but I'll probably be on Comics Channel tonight and Thursday. But thank you all very much for letting me be a part of this. I learned so much when I come on and talk about these kind of things. And 70s has put a lot into this, and I've learned so much that I didn't know, even with the research that I've done. This is one of the cherished moments of my life.
Well, thank you, sir. I'm glad that we've added meaning to your otherwise colorless life.
Yes, without you, I've got nothing. So
Yeah. Living is without you.
Thank you so much. It
Well,
was
thanks
good
for
to
coming
to
on,
you,
mate.
Pope, and Legalize. Good to meet you, and have a wonderful rest. I am going to be listening.
You too, mate.
But have a good one.
It's always great hanging
Yeah,
out with
it's
you.
great talking
Thanks,
with you,
buddy.
Toxic.
Good talking
Absolutely,
to
man. And
Bye-bye.
I'll definitely have you on my channel at some point to talk about some albums coming out.
That would be
Or,
awesome.
Do that.
All right, have a good one.
Cool. So thanks for coming, mate. Yeah, I just want to catch up with a couple of people in the chat. Ed Straker's made a fantastic point about the. It's unlikely there wouldn't be police and insurance reports if a car ended up in the swimming pool.
That's an excellent point, because
And I don't think
that's
there is
gonna
any.
happen.
I don't think there is any. I think he makes a great point there. I'd like to say hi to our great friend, your Muslim uncle. Great guy. Thanks for being here, my friend. And Courtney, I believe, is departing us. She's doing her third farewell tour from this chat. Because I'm sure she went earlier, but she's back. Courtney, my dear, I hope everything went okay today and you're good. And we will definitely have you on for music streams in the future when you're available. You're great person. Thanks for joining us. We're not going yet, though. And then there were 3, one of my favorite Genesis albums. So D-Bud's deserting us, so we're going to be down to 4 people. But we're not quite done yet. So if you guys are okay to carry on for a little longer.
Sure.
Oh, absolutely.
So I just wanted
Can
to...
I touch on just one thing
No,
briefly?
you-
So
go ahead.
Toxic was talking about, this is how you make money in the 60s, is to get into the pop charts. And I think that this brings up something interesting about Pete Townsend, is that he went to art school, but he was not, an ivory tower kind of snob kind of guy. He came from a family of working musicians, so he knew what it took to be successful as a musician in order to get paid for it and make a go of it. So you didn't have to have a second job, So I think what's interesting about Pete is that he does have these very high-minded ideas, but he pulls them off in his music in a way that resonates with ordinary people, right? He's not the kind of musician that only students of music can appreciate.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly an aspect to him, and one of the reasons the Who are so popular pretty much around the world, from music fans and from normies who just listen to the radio. Like, everybody knows who the Who are, and everybody loves them, and I think that has a lot to do with it.
Well, not everybody. I've met some people that don't like him, but it's okay.
A few don't like them, but I think
everyone's wrong sometimes.
Yeah. Well, indeed. I think the triumvirate, if you want to call them that, of the British, I would probably call it a quartet because I'm a big Kinks fan. The Beatles, the Stones, the Who, the Kinks. If Who had a number of achievements that those bands didn't, particularly live, it was as I said earlier, it was the Who that headlined Monterey, first real pop festival of note. They were the first, they headlined Woodstock. Again, the world famous rock music festival, the first of the big ones. They headlined
Except that at the time, people didn't know that's what Woodstock was going to be. It was just another concert.
But it has become that.
In hindsight, it is that. But at the time, my brother and my uncle went to Woodstock, and they didn't even know each other were going. They just bumped into each other, stopping for gas on the drive up there, and they're like, "Oh, you're going to Woodstock too?" Like, "All right, yeah, we'll see you there." And then you get there, and of course, it's like so many people, they never saw each other.
My wife tried to go because she lived in Montreal, and it's not that far a drive down to upstate New York, but the roads were so jammed, couldn't get near, so they just ended up parked in a road somewhere for a day.
Yeah, I bet up there all the roads are just like 2-lane blacktop. There's not like an interstate or anything.
Yeah, a lot of the back roads in New England, like, because that's where I'm from, is it's like 1 lane each way, and you're lucky if you get a shoulder or something like that. But then that's just woods.
Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the recordings, if it's okay with you guys, and I want you to feel free to chime in with your favourites and observations on those too. And to do that, I have to again pull up hopefully a correctly named video. As you say, I spent a lot of time putting these, as Toxie said, a lot of time. So I'm going to take a look at what it's hard to pick between your children, but my top 5 Who albums. And then I want to get you guys to chime in too while we're doing it. So
you're making it easy. We can pick 5.
Yeah, you can. They might be the same. So this is my top 5. Look at these great graphics. Took me ages to do this. So my generation.
Are we going from 5 to 1 here?
5 to 1. The debut album. These are my 5 favourites that if I was forced to pick 5 to take with me to a desert island, Who albums I would. And I'm counting out most of the later, tons of live albums in the last few years. Tons of compilations. I haven't got any. I've got one live album in here, no compilations. Picking proper albums. The only live album I've got in here is the only one that was released during their heyday. So my generation, the debut, brilliant debut, fantastic pop songs on here. Kids Are Alright, My Generation, the early singles, great Rickenbacker sound, absolutely fantastic.
And some blues and Motown covers.
A little bit of blues and Motown because that was the mod thing.
Please is just recently learned is a freaking James Brown song.
That's a James Brown song. It's the one he did at the Tammy Show performance. The show the Stones were on.
And I don't mind.
Yeah,
both James Brown.
Just a nice, cutting little pop album with some really great guitar work. Keith's German is all over it. Roger's vocals here, as we talked about earlier, I don't think I'd really found their landing place yet. So it's possibly that he's still exploring what he's doing. But as debut albums
he's
go,
young.
He's young, yeah.
I mean, they're like 18 or 19 when they cut this album.
Yeah, they were.
Keith was the youngest at like 17.
Yeah. But the songs on here that stand the test of time, Out in the Street, brilliant song. I mean, this could have been the Jam, the Jam.
Yes.
They could have made this album. It's as good as that and the sound is still that beautiful, clear sound that you get on songs like The Kids Are Alright. The chiming Rickenbacker guitars, absolutely love it. So, A Legal Matter, another brilliant song that they still play sometimes today. The Ox, of course, is John's first entry into the darker stuff that he does. So, but yeah, love this album. So I've put it at number 5. These numbers are arbitrary. Tomorrow I could do a different list entirely. I think moving on from that, and there's a little clip of them in that era. I think that's Ready Steady Go. That's from.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they were all over those shows, which was great.
For the youngins, Ready Steady Go was a regular music show on the BBC. Correct.
Yeah, and if you look
weekly.
Yeah, it was weekly. If you look up on YouTube, you'll see the Beatles, the Stones. They were all on there, and multiple times. They all appeared every 2 or 3 weeks and did 2 or 3 songs, and it was live. It was brilliant, great, groundbreaking show for Britain.
Yeah, it was like the British version of American Bandstand.
Yeah,
where all the top pop artists would be on there.
Yeah, it was pretty cool. It was a cool show, way cooler than whatever had come before, So Tommy would be my number 4. Controversial choice, you may say, as it may be many people's number 1. As I said earlier, I've got the DVD audio 5.1 version, and if you've never heard it with true surround sound around you, it kicks ass. It's unbelievable, the clarity of this album. And mainly Pete produced it. I know Kit Lambert gets production credit, but it's Pete that produced it and laid down a lot of the tracks. And it does tell a fantastic story from end to end. And it's got just so many highlight moments. So songs like Sensation or Sally Simpson, which are not hugely well known. I love those songs. It's some of the lesser well-known ones on there that are just... And all the band all got a chance to do a little bit with acting the parts, Uncle Ernie and Tommy and Tommy's Holiday Camp. And But I'm Free, well, you've got that bit at the end with I'm Free, See Me, Feel Me. Those are very powerful, and live, of course, they played them so loud and built up. They worked really well live. So it's a beautiful album, groundbreaking album. That's at my number 4. I don't know how you guys feel about it. Do you think?
Do you know the story of why pinball is included in Tommy?
I probably do, but I would like you to remind me.
So when Pete was preparing this album, by the way, during the time he's preparing this album, he was giving extensive long format interviews to Rolling Stone, which you can find in their issues from like 67, 68, where he's discussing the whole thing before it's even completely gelled. But there was a prominent music reviewer in London who was really into pinball. And Pete knew that this album was going to be so different from everything they'd come out with before that it was going to need to have good reviews for it to be a success. So he intentionally wrote Pinball Wizard and sent that to the music reviewer, the music critic, for him to listen to before the whole album was finished. And if the critic came back and said, "Oh yeah, that's a good song," then he knew he was going to have something in the bag. And it did come back that way. And so that's how pinball got wound into this whole story.
And even though that was the reason it turned into Pinball Wizard turned into the one song that everyone knows by the Who. Like
it's probably the most polished of all of them on this album.
CSI, that's the one everybody knew, and it covers like the Elton John cover as well was a hit, because he's singing in the movie. Pinball Wizard was the song everyone knew, that opening acoustic.
It's true for me. That was the first Who song I ever latched onto.
And I probably was one of the first I heard too. Yeah, it's probably one of the first I heard, and that was at the time. I knew it, but I don't remember the first time I heard it. But it was quite common on the radio. But the whole album is phenomenal, and it's a very acoustic album. A lot of it, as I said before, there's a lot of tracks that have not got heavy guitar in them or heavy lead. He didn't have time to finish them. There's lots of tracks with electric rhythm, and that actually allowed the bass playing and the drum. Keith's controlling his drumming a lot in this one. How they got him to do that, I don't know. But he does play a lot of different stuff in this. So.
And like I said, too, this is the album where you really start seeing what would turn into the Who take shape. It's like this is where you see their sound develop a lot more on this record than
it's definitely the point where they transition away from being a pop band focused on singles to becoming a rock band focused on albums.
Yeah. And I mean, it's a double album, and I love the original vinyl. It's the fold out. It's great artwork, the way you fold it out into 3 sections, and it's just a great package, But I only made it number 4 though, because I'm contrary. That's the back of my particular version, because it's got lots of. The one thing about packaging of Who albums in the last few years has been there's some great deluxe versions. Some great extra, like with CD, with mono and stereo versions, great outtakes. As Legalizing it, we swapped a few. Some of the tracks that have never seen the light of day are on these deluxe editions. Like the Who's version of The Hall of the Mountain King, which I absolutely adore. Just stuff like that, which shows their instrumental prowess. And then there's all the surf stuff that they used to do for fun. Like Barbara Ann and whatever. So anyway, number 3 for me is Who's Next. The first one I really listened to properly because my brother had it. Great iconic sleeve, of course. And then this, I think, as an album is the most complete studio album because every single track is a killer. There is no filler on here. You could take any track off here on its own and it stands up against anything else anyone could do.
Well, when you look at the track list too, almost every one of them is still played on every rock station around the world today.
Yeah.
Probably the ones that get the least amount of play are Love Ain't for Keeping and Song Is Over.
Yep.
Yeah, I love those. And Song Is Over is a beautiful track. Absolutely beautiful. You've got your entire CSI future series in here. But if you listen to Babbo O'Reilly, I know it's been overplayed a lot because of that. you talked about it earlier. It's got that keyboard piece. It's got that beautiful fiddle, rock fiddle. Don't get a lot of great fiddling in rock.
And again, in '71, it was a completely new sound. Like nobody was doing this.
Yeah.
And so when you hear that on the radio, it's just like, what the hell are these guys doing? This is awesome.
Turns into a jig at the end. That jig sound, you know.
Another thing that I think was different for the Who is that when they play that live, Roger plays the fiddle part on harmonica, and that elevated harmonica to a first-class instrument for rock, which it hadn't been previously.
Well, that's right. Yeah, I think that's a good point, and it did set people. Other people tried to do similar things following that, you know. But that, Bobby O'Reilly is just and it isn't even the title isn't even in the song.
Yes. And that was uncommon back then.
Well,
usually...
so that Baba O'Reilly, you guys know the meaning of that title.
Well, it's Mayor Baba, and
so the synthesizer parts being formulated from biographical data, Mayor Baba, his spiritual guru. That's where the Baba part comes from, and the O'Reilly part is from the guy who did Tubular Bells. What's his first name? Something Riley.
Not Mike Oldfield. Mike Oldfield did Tubular Bells.
Maybe I'm misremembering then. It's maybe Jerry Riley, but it's another guy who was experimenting with electronic music, and that's why it's Baba. So it's Mayor Baba's biographical facts
married with
in a form of electronic music that is, I believe it's Terry Riley.
Terry Riley, yes, Terry Riley.
Not to be confused with Terry O'Reilly, one of the Bruins enforcers from back in the day.
That's right, yeah. No, Terry Riley, he was in a couple of bands as well at that time, yeah. I'm trying, and didn't he do some stuff with Led Zeppelin as well? Terry Riley, he did a track with them.
It could be. I know the name.
Yeah, he was on the scene, as it were.
Says he's an American composer and performing musician, best known as a pioneer of the minimalist school of composition, influenced by jazz and Indian classical music.
Oh, I'm thinking of a different guy.
This is Wikipedia just coming out for Terry Riley, but
no, I'm thinking of a different Terry. But no, good Terry Riley. I'll look at that up. Yeah,
double check the.
But yeah, each track on here is a gem, and it has some of their Stone Cold classics, some of their most complete songs.
Okay, yeah, but Wikipedia is linking to that page that I just read from.
Yeah.
For Bob O'Reilly, so I had it right.
And Behind Blue Eyes, of course, beautiful ballad with a powerful chorus, all about Keith.
So the song Going Mobile has what sounds like a synthesizer part, but it's Pete playing his guitar through an effects chain.
Yep.
I don't know if you knew that.
I did, but that's what Yngwie started doing later on in his career.
Yeah, you can make it
again, for
different.
71, this was something that this was a completely new sound for rock music that nobody had done before.
Yeah, that's like this was just completely unheard of at the time.
Yeah, it's their most complete album, I think, in terms of songs, and the experimentation they did worked on every song. And
it shows, because when I was listening through their records for the stream, I was amazed at how early this album came out. Like, I thought this was probably 77, 78.
No, much earlier, yeah.
And then I saw it on the discography, it was 71. It's like, wow, okay.
I also think one of the reasons this album sounds so good is the production by Glenn Johns.
Absolutely. Great producer. He'd just come from working with the Beatles as well and other acts like that. So great producer. Still alive today as well. He's knocking on, but he's been a fantastic producer over the decades.
And you mentioned how the modern reissues have bonus material.
Yeah.
I believe it's a bonus track on Who's Next, but there's an electric version of Love Ain't for Keeping with Leslie West as the lead guitarist and Pete on rhythm. And that version is smoking hot.
Maybe that's why they do Hall of the Mountain King as well then. Didn't Mountain do that? Anyway, that's quite, yeah, I mean, I may have that on, I have the complete of everything on digital.
The version on the album, this one here, this 2 minutes 11, it's soft and gentle and sweet, but the one with Leslie West is rockin' and hard ass, not mean, but just manly, if you will.
Yeah, muscular.
Yes,
is the way I'd put it. And also, my wife continues the John stuff of doing more. He does more straightforward hard rock, and that's an example of that. His songs are really quite tight hard rock songs, which I like. So yeah, great album. I got it at number something.
John said of my wife that when he wrote it, it was a fairy tale, and then it became true.
And there's Pete with his gear. So that was number 3. Number 2 for me. This was a tough choice because I could have had Who's Next at number 1. Quadrophenia. Ooh. I love Quadrophenia, and particularly this deluxe edition.
The 4-disc set.
The box set. This is a fucking awesome package. It's got a 7-inch single in it.
That's what she said.
I love those 7-inch ones. But the album itself, as distinct from the movie soundtrack, which has its good stuff on it, actually. I mean, there's some stuff on there I like. To me is the most. I like Tommy, but I think Quadrophenia tells a better story with some more complicated songs and implications in them. And it's because it is. We talked about this earlier. They're all different personalities. The Quadrophenia of the pieces, and you guys know this, is that it's a facet of each of them makes up the band. All 4 of them. The art school, artsy guy and angsty guy and Pete. Roger, the working class bruiser. Keith, the clown, the jester, and John, the silent, thoughtful type. And I think the album manages to build all those in really well into Jimmy, the central character.
Yeah, and I like what you say with you need all 4 of those guys to build the band, and it's funny because each one of them has turned into like an archetype of that type of musician, like the bass player, the strong silent one.
Yeah,
just kind of does no nonsense, just does his job and stays out of trouble.
Yeah,
and the drummer being an absolute wild animal.
Yeah, and I don't know why it is, but for me, sorry, I jumped too far ahead. It's always flowed better a little bit than Tommy. It's got less well-known songs to the public, although it got stone cold classics like 5:15, which was the time I started this show, by the way, Eastern time, 5:15.
Yep. I didn't even realize that until you said it pre-show. I'm like, why is it 5:15? That seems like a weird time.
Because normally I start at 2 Pacific. I did 2:15 today.
It's just like, oh yeah.
And tracks like Love, Rain or Me, which our friend Legalize here, I've heard him singing that song in karaoke, and he kills it. Don't you, my friend?
Wait, you've heard it? I
thought you sent me a little
have
clip
a video clip of it.
I thought you sent me a clip of it.
Maybe I did. Maybe somebody took a small clip.
I thought I had a little clip of you singing that. Anyway,
whatever clips I got are on my channel.
You told me you nailed it.
I've been continuing to improve my version of that, and recently, like a couple of weeks ago, just sang a version that I think was my best rendition ever. You need to be recording
these.
Yeah.
But yeah, that song is exceptionally difficult to sing because it's really full-throated.
Oh yeah,
you need that vocal power in your voice too that Roger has, and it's just hard to do.
You need some pipes for sure.
Where he gained the power from doing things like Tommy, and then all those live gigs where he had to really go for it. Put that to full use on here.
I think all that touring worldwide to support Tommy, performing the entire thing, and maybe 2-3 times a week for months on end. I think that really not only brought him into a stage persona, as Pete has said, that during that tour, Roger became Tommy. On stage, he was Tommy. And I think Roger got a lot of self-confidence in both in his singing and in his performing. because that's the point where he's wearing that outfit where it's just the leather, what do they call them, the frills or whatever, but he's completely bare chested, and as a dude performing on stage, I mean, Roger's always been a guy that's been in good shape, but to be able to pull that look off, there's not many people that could do it.
Yeah, like he did it. Robert Plant from Zeppelin did it a fair bit, but yeah, it's not an easy look to pull off.
Morrison had his shirt off, but that's just because he was drunk.
Yeah, he probably didn't know where his shirt was.
I've taken my shirt off at gigs before, but it wasn't quite as well received. So. But yeah, I think that for me, this album is the peak of Pete's art, but utilizing the others in it to their strengths.
Now, the interesting thing is, this is one of the few, maybe the only Who album that does not have a single Entwistle composition on it.
That's right. He does do his bit with the brass work on it, but he doesn't write anything. Yeah.
That's right. And he was being interviewed once, and they asked him, how come you don't have any bass solos on Quadrophenia? And he said, the whole album is a bass solo. And if you listen to it carefully, that rings true. The whole thing. It's like it starts as a bass solo with the opening riff in The Real Me, and it just continues all the way through to the end of Love Reign Over Me.
Well, this might be an opportune time, actually, to try and just play that bass bit from 515, if you guys don't mind.
Absolutely.
It's your stream, buddy.
Yeah, hopefully we'll get away with it.
You going to do the Royal Albert Hall one or the
I was going to do the one you
Okay.
sent me. So we'll try a little bit of it. I might have to put an overlay. We might get away with it. I mean, they won't take the stream down, but I might have to cut it out later for copyright purposes.
Well, it hasn't been copyright claimed on my channel, and it's been up there for years. So maybe the algo misses it.
Yeah, but YouTube hates me.
Every now and again, too, like you'll get a video that's been out for years flagged.
This would be considered new content. So
hang on a second while I manipulate things here. I've got an overlay. It doesn't make any difference, but we'll try it. Let's full screen that.
Makes us feel better.
Makes you feel better. Makes me feel like I'm a professional with an overlay. Right, here we go. This is the bass solo from 515. This was in Chicago House of Blues, 1999. Is that right?
Correct.
Yeah, here we go. Standout track in Quadrophenia. But live, total epic. Love that sound.
Dirty.
It's genius. You could drop him into a metal band, big metal band, and that would fit perfectly. What a sound. Lead bass.
Actually sounds a lot like some of the Wesley Claypool stuff Brian does.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, yeah. Just beautiful. That meant they could get away without having 8 musicians. So, yeah, and if anyone watching wants to go find the version from the Royal Albert Hall with the camera on the headstock of the bass, it's just phenomenal. But what a genius as a player. He said it right. He's a bass guitarist, not a bass player.
Now, I may be partial because I was at the show, but of all the different versions of the 515 bass solo that came out in 99 and in the 2000 tour, that one is still my favorite. Even compared to the Royal Albert Hall one, there's something about that one. It's not too long, it's not too short. It's just tight. There's no like weird wanderings off.
Yeah,
it's just in there.
The Royal Albert Hall one's a little bit twiddlier. But so anyway, we're moving on to number one. Sorry, I forgot to press pause.
Woo-hoo.
So my number one Who album would be Who Live at Leeds, particularly the deluxe edition, which is the whole show. Because the original one that I had way back in the past in a cassette, the one that was originally released, just had certain tracks. The deluxe edition is the entire show, and it's fucking awesome. It is possibly the best live album ever. Again, controversial saying that. That's my opinion only. It shows the band at the height of their power and majesty live. Just rips the paint off the walls. Thunderous power. It blew me away the first time I heard it as a kid. Like, what? A band that's this? They allow people to do this on stage? This is what concerts are? It's so loud. But loud, but power. It's muscular and powerful, not so much just loud.
That's always the great part about being a fan of these bands too, is like when somebody who isn't or who's never heard of them before, it's just like, well, why do you guys love it so much? Just hand them the album. Just go, here you go.
Yeah.
You'll get it.
Yeah. So, listen to this, and you would if you'd never heard anything else by The Who, you would think these bands are epic.
So 70s has heard my collection of live Who spanning 40 years, and I've given that to people. I used to press CD, not press, but like burn CDs with a nice label on it. I would give it to some people, and they were like, more than one person has said to me, I never really cared much for The Who until I heard this, and now I'm a fan. Now I see what people are always on about.
Yeah.
Why this is, because the live sound and energy has always been so much better than what they got in the studio, even though they have some really good studio work.
This is why I used to think and probably to me, they still are the greatest live band in history for this period of their career, 67 to 76, a little bit later as well.
Yeah.
They were majestic. They were muscular. They took many of these songs, which were subtle songs on the records, and they could play them live with just those four guys, and you loved them just as much. They made them better. They turned things like "We're Not Going to Take It" into just an epic. The sweet windmilling, the guitar, John's doing all that stuff. This was in Leeds University, so I don't know how many thousands, not many thousands of people watching it. Unbelievable to have been there. I would love to have been there. Just if I could go back in time, I'd go to that gig.
So this album, there's one moment on it that always gives me goosebumps, and it's on Young Man Blues. There's a guitar part, and then just as they're about to come back into the lyrics, Roger just screams out, "Hit it!" And then there's one more piece of guitar work, and then they come back into the chorus. And just like I have literally been listening to this album for 30 years, like ever since I first heard it in high school, and I get goosebumps every single time I'm listening to that song at that exact same spot.
Yeah. Oh, me too. And I think it's got some of Pete's finest guitar work ever on it. I don't know what he was on that day, but he was just burning it up.
Well, there's a bootleg of this full show that was going around before the deluxe edition came out, and on the bootleg, it's all raw. So you find out they did a little bit of slicing and dicing in the edit room to clean it up a little bit, but that turns it into like a perfect powerhouse, right? I mean, it's okay. I kind of goofed the guitar lick in this one bar, so we'll just slice that bar out, and then it's just wham.
Yeah, it's just
the
such
other
a
thing we haven't
powerful
mentioned
thing.
is when this album came out, it was because at that time live records of rock bands were almost unheard of. The only way you could get a live recording was to get a bootleg, and there were these bootlegs of a Dylan concert that really became the first bootleg that anybody had heard of, that there were these underground live recordings that you could get. And so when Live at Leeds was issued, it was vinyl, but it was in a really crappy paper sleeve that was, flimsy and would deteriorate. And it had like all these weird paraphernalia that was reprinted and stuck in there, like fake reprints of a handbill from a concert and stuff like that, including a letter from a record executive rejecting the band, saying never thought they would ever amount to anything, and all these kinds of stuff inside. And that also made that album have a bigger impact. Not only was it this live recording when you couldn't get a live recording of a band, you'd have to go see them live to hear what they sounded like live. And then with all his little minor fixings in the edit room, he turned his live performance into a perfect performance. Not that there was huge edits, just little bits here and there. So it was already like 98%. It was like, well, if we just take out this extra little bit, it'll be like 99%. So they did that. And then this became the standard by which every live album was judged throughout the entire 70s.
1970.
Yeah.
Think about that. They'd gone in 3 or 4 years from little pop hits to this towering monster of rock, playing this spellbinding 2.5 hour, 3 hour gig.
And that's a hell of an
music.
ass too. A 3 hour concert is a lot, especially for a guitar player and stuff like that. Your hands are dead after a while. Like, I mean, even an hour or two is work.
Yeah.
But a 3 hour set is just.
Well, imagine how Keith Moon drumming for 3 hours doing this.
Right.
I mean, he didn't look fit, but he could certainly do it. But
he was fit as a fiddle in 69, 70 when this was all recorded. He didn't start getting pudgy until late 70s.
Yeah, they just filled the sound in so much with all that, the drumming, with the bass, John's bass being all up and down. It's a definitive live album, and there's lots of great live albums out there. They all followed this. It's still hard to beat this one after 52 years or whatever the hell.
I mean, I think that Stage Fright and No Sleep Till Hammersmith are both kind of on this level, but like you say, this is one of those singular albums of just nothing was like it.
Stand out in rock history for me, and it's my favorite. I would take this album over. If I had to ditch every Who album, I would take this one.
Yeah.
And it was the only live album released
during
a tough
toss-up between this and Quadrophenia for me, but
during their original incarnation, it's the only live album they released. So, I mean, there's been dozens since.
There were plenty of bootlegs.
And like you said, too, this was not a common thing back then. Like, you didn't just get a live album every now and again.
No. And if they were crap, screaming fans and whatever. Like the Beatles at the Hollywood Bowl, not released at the time, of course, just ruined by crap recording and screaming. And so this
plus their amplifier gear, like, they weren't very loud. They didn't have like a stack of amps and everything to deliver their sound.
You know that Jim Marshall created the 100-watt amp for the Beatles for their 1965 US tour. He created the 100-watt amp for them. They said, we need a bigger amp. Even that, you couldn't hear them. They kept driving Marshall to create bigger amps, and then they gave up in the end.
I mean, 100-watt amp inside Shea Stadium with 10,000 or however many screaming teenage girls. You're not going to hear anything.
Using the house PA with those tinny little speakers all over the basement.
You're not going to hear anything.
Yeah.
And what you do hear is going to sound like shit.
Yeah.
I have a little story about Live at Leeds. So before I bought my first Who album, the song that I had heard that I really liked was Magic Bus. And the only way to hear something that you didn't own or that you didn't know anybody who owned it that you could borrow it was to call into the radio and request a song. Now, where I lived in Delaware, we didn't have local rock stations. We had to get our rock music from Philly. So I'm calling into a Philly station, of which, 99 times out of 100, it's just busy. You can't get through. But I kept calling and calling and calling, and I finally got in. and they answered the phone and said, hey, you know, I think it was WMMR. There were two rock stations, WMMR and WYSP. I think WYSP might still be around. One of them's gone. One of them's still around. But the guy's like, WMMR. And I'm like, yeah, I want to hear Magic Bus by The Who. And he's like, Magic Bus. Okay, I can do that. You know, it should be on, 15 minutes or whatever. So there I am with my little cassette recorder, because I'm going to put my cassette recorder up to the speaker and record it. So I had Magic Bus that I could listen to it on cassette. And he didn't play the studio version. He played the long 8-minute version from Live at Leeds. And when it came, which I had never heard, and when it came on, I didn't even recognize it as Magic Bus in the beginning. Yeah. And then as it gets into it, I'm like, oh, this is it. But I've never, and I quick press record on the cassette recorder.
Because it's totally different, the live version.
Totally
it has to be
different.
It has to be, yeah.
And, but man, what an impression that made to hear my first exposure to live Who music being the version of Magic Bus from Live at Leeds that just seems to go on forever until it ends in a giant crescendo. I was like, I don't know what that was that I just heard, but I really, really like it.
Let's hope Keith didn't fall over his drums in that one. But yeah, that's what an introduction to the, hang on. I gotta share. I'm just gonna try and share another screen. So there's the real Magic Bus. I know it's very small. Forgive me, because Magic Bus, the song, they actually had an album in the US, Magic Bus. That wasn't in the UK. It was just a song.
Yeah. It was subtitled, The Who on Tour, and which was a complete lie because there were no live tracks on the album, and it was just a weird mishmash of the songs that they
US
had.
People do to those. You chop all the British albums up and do stupid things. Anyway,
for some reason, that was a thing back in the 60s and 70s. Was they would just release it in this entirely different album in the US.
Yeah, the Beatles hated it. They chopped all the Beatles British albums up and made all these copies of other things in America and put different tracks on them. And yeah, they stopped that at Revolver. That was it. Said no more, enough. But anyway, so those albums are I love all the Who albums, but have you guys got any others that you would say would
So
be
my
your
top 5, well, I start at 1. I'd have to put Quadrophenia at 1.
Mm-hmm.
And then
I can see that.
For 2, somewhere in there is going to be a live album. And the question is it going to be Live at Leeds or is it going to be something else? And actually, I think if I had to pick a narrow list, I might pick the soundtrack from Kids Are All Right as my favorite live album, just because it spans their entire career.
Yeah.
And really, some of the versions that are on there, like the version of I Can't Explain that's on there is really good. The version of Anyway, Anyhow, Anywhere is really good.
Yeah.
And the version of a quick one from the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus just knocks it out of the park.
And they blew the Stones off the stage.
Oh, man.
Which is partly why
took the Stones 20 years, 30 years to release that. It came out in the 90s.
Tell how old this is. It's all falling apart. My Kids Are All Right. This was the first Who album I bought. I had copied others. That's the first one I bought.
And the live version of My Wife that's on there is also really rocking. The only car wreck I've ever caused myself was because I was listening to that version of My Wife and I wasn't paying attention when I got to the intersection, and I caused an accident with another car.
You could have said to the police, I blame my wife.
Well, I was like 17 or 16 at the time. I didn't have a wife. But so Kids Are All Right. Quadrophenia. Definitely Who's Next is in there somewhere. I'm going to put Who Are You in there as well. And then for my number 5,
it's tough. I mean,
might have to be Live at Leeds or My Generation. My Generation is a good pick. Who Sell Out is in the running, but it's still Who Sell Out is still in that period where they're still hit or miss. It's not until Tommy that like all of the songs are worthy.
I think so.
So it might be Tommy would edge out live at Leeds, and might stick with the Kids Are All Right for my live pick.
Mm-hmm.
And that's of the original batch of studio stuff, right? Or original releases. If I were to widen it to include later releases, I might swap out Kids Are All Right for the Isle of Wight 1970.
Yeah, and that's a brilliant one.
Or swap out Tommy in favor of that, because it's basically a whole performance of Tommy.
Yeah, I mean, if you extend it to the top 10, I would have that in there. But I'd also possibly have Endless Wire too, which I do love as an album. So,
Endless Wire and Who are both decent, but they don't grab me by the balls, so to speak.
Well, Endless Wire is very much a more contemplative pop album rather than a rock.
I think it's just reflective of the fact that as an artist, you have to be experiencing some kind of pain or conflict to get to your best material. And Pete is a successful musician at this point. He's not experiencing any real pain or conflict. And so I think he struggles to come up with material that reaches you on a visceral level.
He's just happy.
It's not that he's too happy per se. It's just that his music is coming from a different place in his life.
Sure. Yeah, but
which is to be expected, right?
I think he had some great tracks on there. Mike Post theme was good. And
I'm not saying they're bad.
Yeah.
Definitely in 2006 when they were performing Endless Wire and I saw him live in San Jose, California. Tea and Theater was a really impressive vocal powerhouse for Roger, because that's one of those songs that you have to have the pipes to pull that off, because you go from singing softly to singing at full power within the line, one or two lines of the lyrics.
It's just acoustic backing, yeah. Well, that's a very emotional song.
Yes. And We Got a Hit. I like that song.
I love that song.
For sure.
That could have been on My Generation on the album. That song could almost have been on that album. So
it's not that the songs are bad. It just doesn't punch me in the gut, shall we say.
It's a fair attempt, though. So Metallica's my friend. I know we've mentioned a lot of albums. Is there anything about those which ones appeal to you the most?
I mean, Who's Next is probably my favorite record by them.
Yeah.
Just if you want to have like the biggest collection of their classic output, it's all on Who's Next, and every song on that record's great. Quadrophenia is probably right up there. That and Tommy, I think, are right next to each other. It's probably 2 and 3. Because I love the whole concept album thing. I love it when metal bands do it. I really like it when they kind of telling their own story. Love it when King Diamond does it. So it's pretty good. And then probably Who Are You? Just for that one song, because everybody knows it. And number 5, interesting, because I have like a couple that I could pick, but it's mostly for individual songs. Maybe Face Dances in '81. That had some pretty interesting stuff on it.
Yeah, I mean, I do like that album, and I mean, it had their last real hit on that in Britain anyway. You Better You Bet.
Man, that's a great song. It's a great track.
Yeah, there's some good stuff on there.
It's definitely Pete getting back to writing a pop single.
Absolutely.
I mean, that album all around is conceived as a piece of pop art.
Yeah.
Everything from the album cover to the way it was promoted and the single. And although it's, Kenny Jones is reported to have said that he was really pissed off at Pete because he kept all the best songs for Empty Glass, his solo album.
Well, I love Empty Glass. That's one.
I like Empty Glass a lot better than I like Face Dances, even though Face Dances was my quote unquote album when it came out. It's the first, after I'd become a big Who fan, it was the first new album to come out for me.
Yeah, Empty Glass, we could do a whole, as we said earlier, we could do a whole Pete Townsend solo thing, but I do love Empty Glass, or Rough Boys and tracks like that. A Little Is Enough is just such a beautiful track.
I like Face Dances, but actually You Better You Bet is the song I like least on that entire album.
And that was the hit. Yeah. It's
the same with It's Hard. Athena was the single off of that album, and it's also the one I like least.
Well, I want to come back to that album in a minute. Now, have you guys got another 15 minutes in you?
Yeah.
I got time until you kick me out.
Yeah, I'll do it. Let's head to the top of the hour. I had another one of these little videos of 5 somethings. So if you guys are okay, because this is me showing what I like, and you guys get a chance to, if you're okay with that, I'd like to show this one too. This little clip.
Go for it.
And then we'll talk about the material. So I went for 5. What are 5 tracks I think don't get enough attention? And 1 or 2 have been mentioned already, of course. But video file, he says, looking for it. So my top 5 underlooked Who tracks. It's not to say they're not famous and well known, but they're not as famous as well known as CSI. They're not on CSI. Well, one of them is kind of, I think, but I think one of them might have been used in a latter CSI that's not as well known. So Heaven and Hell, John Entwistle written and sang track, kicks off the Live at Leeds live version of it. I think it was on a Quick One album, Heaven and Hell.
It might have only been like a B-side of a single.
Yeah, it's a possibly.
I'm thinking of U.S. albums, like you said, they chopped them all up between the UK and the U.S.
Heaven and Hell, absolutely fantastic John track, possibly my favorite John, and it's about what it says. It's about heaven and hell, you know.
And I think a lot of the reason this kind of faded into the background and got overshadowed was because of the same song title by Black Sabbath.
Well, absolutely, yeah, that became, and I do love that Black Sabbath one. That's my favorite Black Sabbath.
That entire record is just
my favorite Black Sabbath album, and I know sacrilege to Aussie fans, but I love the Dio version.
So I got to say, I was never a big fan of this song until I heard the live version from Isle of Wight. Then I was like, "Whoa, okay, this is different."
The live version of this is killer, and it's got a great. I don't know how you would describe it, where he goes up and down before the chorus, and it's like a crescendo, and then it's the hard chorus. It's one of John's finest songs live, and it's very powerful. Great set opener.
Yeah, I mean, it opens up like a jet engine was just switched on.
That's right.
It goes from 0 to 100 right away.
Possibly his best vocal performance.
That's what it was. It was the B-side of Summertime Blues.
Yeah,
and that's why.
And because it wasn't on the original Live at Leeds, I didn't hear it till much later as a live song.
Yeah,
love it. It's my favorite John song, and he really rocks hard on this one. Some great chunky riffs from Pete as well, because he doesn't have to worry too much. It's not his song. He's really enjoys playing it, I think. But very great hard rock.
I think you can see they enjoy playing it in the Isle of Wight footage.
Yes, it's Pete really likes playing this because I think he doesn't have to worry about anything else. He just has to play it. John's doing all the driving, you know. Great track, love it. Heaven and Hell. I think another one I would say is deserving of a little more attention for me is the song Long Live Rock, which originally appeared on the Odds and Sods album, I believe.
Yep.
And then was reused again on the soundtrack of Quadrophenia. I have the 7-inch. I have the single, actually. It's, to me, the most straightforward hard rock song the Who ever did. It's just 3 minutes of hard rock. Yeah,
it's a lot more familiar to somebody who, for like AC/DC or something like that, like later hard rock stuff. Like that's a lot more in line with that than a lot of their other stuff.
Yeah, you're right, Metallica. That's what I was kind of thinking. To me, it's a straightforward hard rock song. If you liked AC/DC or something like that and heard that, you'd go, "That's pretty good." You know.
If I remember the story correctly, Pete composed it for use in a film, and the film didn't get made.
Yeah.
And then it became a leftover song, and that's how it ended up on Odds and Sods.
I don't suppose it was a Lifehouse thing, was it? Like a lot of
no, it wasn't a Pete project. It was he was contacted to create a song for somebody else's project.
Right.
I think it was supposed to be like, a rock and roll movie.
Yeah. But the first time I'd have to look it up. Was it in Stardust, maybe? The film, the 74 film that Keith Moon was in, it might have been meant to be for Stardust.
Let's see what.
I've got that up here, actually. Because that was about
Oh, it was for That'll Be the Day.
Which was the first film before Stardust about the
Yeah.
same character. So there was
It
two
was.
films.
It's Wikipedia says it was written by him. A different
Yeah.
version of the song was performed
So
by
David
Billy
S-
Fury's character in That'll Be the Day.
Yeah, and then they made a sequel, Stardust, with David Essex playing the lead guy again. It's about young bands in the history of British rock. And then Keith Moon was in the second one as a drummer. Yeah, those were very popular films in Britain. That'll Be the Day and Stardust. About basically a young guy, history of British rock and roll, starting a band, blah, blah, blah. But yeah,
Now,
so
were you
so
in
this,
the UK when this song was released?
Yes, yeah.
So how well did it do in the UK? Did it,
I think
you
it
know,
kind of
was it
scraped
popular?
the top 20 as a single. And the single was quite late on. It was like 1979 or something.
Right,
Well
because
after
it was used in the trailing credits of The Kids Are All Right.
Yes.
And so it came out
It was
on the
round
Kids Are All Right soundtrack.
Yeah, and that's when it was released as a single, I think.
Right. Yeah, because this
I-
picture on the single is definitely 78.
But the first time I heard it, I thought, is that the Who? It sounded way too hard, straightforward hard rock for them. I love it. I just love the guitar, the catchy chorus. It's just, it rocks hard. It's great. Love this song. So, and a lot of people have never heard it.
That's why
It's
I was
one of-
wondering how much radio play it got in the UK.
Quite a bit, and they have played it live quite a lot in subsequent years. So
I think in the US, I never heard it on the radio until The Kids Are All Right came out.
yeah, so there's
So
it's-
79-ish.
Which the Who always lent themselves to these collections because they had so much stuff that was left over or never used. So number 3 for me in this sequence of underlooked songs would be "The Kids Are All Right" itself as a song, not the album, which kind of gets overshadowed by, for me, by My Generation anyway, anyhow, and I Can't Explain. There's them doing the video for it, miming in front of some park in London, Regent's Park or something. But I love this song. It's just me, it's the perfect jangly guitar pop. I think Roger co-wrote it as well, and he plays guitar in it live as well. And it's a beautiful, the harmonies. It could almost be the Beach Boys. Could be a Beach Boys song. And I've always loved that. I love that jangly guitar sound.
I think what always struck me about this song is when I first got my copy of the My Generation album, the version of The Kids Are All Right that's on there is longer and has a big instrumental break that's cut from the single version.
I know.
And I was like, whoa, because that instrumental break is very reminiscent of the instrumental break in My Generation. It's very gnashing of teeth,
Yeah,
if you
it's
will.
a complete change of tone, yeah. It's kind of a jam. But yeah, I've always loved this song, and I'm glad they play it live all the time. When they played it in Glasgow in '94, it brought the house down. Roger was just almost weeping with the reaction to it, you know. Number 2, what did I pick? Oh yeah, Eminence Front.
I love this track. It's one of my favorites from the Who, just because of that feel, that very funk vibe that it has to it. I just love.
Yeah, that's what's always attracted me, as a real warm, funky vibe to it. Sophisticated a sheen on it that's the Who didn't always have. A very sophisticated sound. It just moves along beautifully. It's almost, again, could be not a Who song.
Yeah.
It's so different from what they often do. And I don't know if did they use it for one of the fake CSI latter days. I don't know, because they ran out of Who songs.
Don't think so.
I don't think it was used.
CSI Cyber or something, or I don't know. But I've always loved this song, and it was a bit of a hit. And live went across very well on that latter day Kenny Jones tour. I don't think they play it that much now, though, if at all. But I've always loved it. It swings. It's got this warm city vibe to it, which I can't quite describe. You said it very well, Metallica. But yeah, I love this track. I think it deserves far more attention.
So I don't know if you're familiar with the YouTube channel. I think it's called Polyphonic.
Yes.
He does music commentary, and he did a video on this song where he says, in his opinion, this is the last great single to come out of the Who.
You could be right, yeah. Yeah. And it's very sophisticated in a funky, sophisticated way that that the Who didn't always do. Like they were more rock or even their acoustic stuff wasn't funky, you know. This is funky.
Yeah.
In I can always hear Steely Dan doing it, or a version of Steely Dan. You know, it's
I can hear it. Yeah,
a little.
It's a little light on the arrangement for Steely Dan, but yeah.
It's got prog elements to it too. Like, you know, I could see like a Thin Lizzy or somebody like that doing something like
Lizzy with the more keyboard driven parts of Lizzy could have done it. Yeah.
Now, what's interesting about this song and this whole album actually is they use Tim Gorman on keyboards, and normally they would have used John Bundrick, who goes by the nickname Rabbit, but there was some kind of falling out, and he didn't end up on this album, and I think it was because they'd all gotten sober, they being the members of the Who, and Bundrick was still drinking really heavily, and so they were like, it ain't gonna work, dude. And so this was one of the few tours that they did where they didn't have John Bundrick on keyboards. And had he been sober, I would not have been surprised if they would have used him on keyboards on this album. But the 82 tour, they used Tim Gorman. But the stuff prior and the stuff after, they used Rabbit.
Because I forgot about that, because I've seen them with Rabbit a few times, and I forgot about the other guy, yeah. Although I have seen him.
That's why the keyboard doesn't sound anything at all like what Rabbit would have played.
Yeah, they'd given in by then, and they had to have a keyboard player live. It was just impossible to go out without one. So,
well, yeah, I mean, especially when you're doing that much with the electronics out of the house, you have to.
Plus, there's a lot of songs in their catalog that have a piano accompaniment, and it really just doesn't sound right if you don't have a piano.
There's a lot,
and it's just going to work better to have a musician instead of a tape, especially because a lot of the songs from Who's Next and Quadrophenia that they wanted to give some concert time to because they were good songs, but they just hadn't been in the live roundup for so long. You can pull it off with a keyboard player, and obviously
piano intros to
515. Yeah. And obviously for various other tours, they've had more or less people on stage to help flesh things out, to open the repertoire of what they can pull off on stage.
Yeah. So I'm going to hit you with one more.
Woohoo.
And it's been mentioned already by you, Legalize. Possibly my favorite overlooked or underappreciated after we get past Eminence Front. Who song is the mighty, mighty, mighty Magic Bus. I don't think this track gets the respect it deserves in the rock world, because both versions, the studio and the live version, are killer. The studio version, if you listen to it in headphones particularly, there's so much warm shit going on in there. There's great percussion.
There's a lot. Yeah, there's a lot of shit going on in that song.
Yeah, a lot of stuff in that. The acoustic guitars, the different patterns of them, the different times, and Roger's got a great vocal on it. It's just, and then the pace changes and it starts to rock up a bit. It's one of my favorite songs to listen to in headphones for sure. There's so much vocabulary. There's so much going on in there. And then
so have you heard Pete's demo for Magic Bus?
Yeah.
So his demo is like super stoner, goofy, messing around in an apartment by himself kind of song. And I think he released it on Scoop or another Scoop. It might have been on the first one, Scoop.
I think it was the first one. Yeah.
Yeah. And in the liner notes for that song, he's just like, I never really understood why people really like this song so much, because it's just me being, farting around the studio and being goofy, but daft punters, what can you do?
But yes, I love it. I don't know if Pete's always been a bit like that, but I think it's one of their greatest achievements when you listen to it. It's so sultry when it starts. That it's and it's got that.
It's just a basic Bo Diddley beat, right?
It's Bo Diddley, yeah. But there's something about it. It's edgy, but not too menacing. And I love the lyrics, you know, threepence and sixpence. I mean, who in America would know what that meant?
Oh, that song, it is such a Londoner song, right?
It is. Buses.
Americans don't ride the damn bus because, you know, the first thing you do is, as a teenager, is save up money to get a car.
Yeah.
So British. It's British pseudo psychedelia public transport.
And the whole story in the song is like he's gonna save up and buy the bus so he can drive his girl wherever he wants. He's not buying a car; he's buying a bus.
Yeah, but the whole thing flows beautifully. It ends in a typical Who thrash, you know, at the end. It just with the electric kicks in and the drumming, but it's definitely one of my favorites to listen to loud on headphones. And then the live versions are killer as well, because they have to make up for all that other shit by just playing really loud electric guitar.
It's a song that's grown on me a lot as I've listened to it. Like I used to not like it at all. It was like seemed like really stupid and poppy. And then when I really started playing music myself, I'm like, oh, there's a lot of really complicated stuff going on in here.
Yeah,
I may want to actually pay attention.
It's some of Pete's best acoustic playing. He's a great acoustic player, but this is some of his best riffing on acoustics. So. Yeah, that was
I
my
don't play an instrument myself, but that comment from you, Metallica, is something I've heard echo from many other musicians. They say that, you know, these songs sound simple until you try to play them.
Yep. And
then you're like, oh, he's doing that. And then he's doing this. And then he's doing this other thing. And he took something that's actually really difficult and made it sound really simple. And
I find that phenomenon with Eddie Van Halen all the time, where it's just like, I watched him do what he's play that, and I still don't know what the fuck just happened.
Yeah. If you listen to Rick Beato's channel, he's always talking about how Pete Townsend likes sus chords.
Yeah.
Which is like, I've learned enough jargon from watching his channel to kind of know what that is. But I'm always like, whenever I watch a Rick Beato video, I'm always looking things up on Wikipedia because half the time he's talking way over my head.
So Brahma Bull, we did mention Happy Jack, but Happy Jack's one of those wonderful Who songs of the mid '60s where they really did these really weird different things. I'm a Boy, Pictures of Lily. Lyrically, they were all fantastic. Happy Jack. I mean, who would write a song like Happy Jack and have it as a hit single? It's just.
Now, here's a piece of trivia for Happy Jack. For the longest time, people knew that the whole Live at Leeds concert was recorded. But the Happy Jack that's on The Kids Are All Right is from Live at Leeds.
Oh.
And for the longest time, we had this little extra piece of Live at Leeds, and we didn't know that that's where it came from. It's probably buried in the liner notes, but we just all forgot or whatever.
And it used to annoy me that when I first bought Live at Leeds, I thought, where's the rest of this freaking concert? You know, they couldn't have been just that.
Yeah, and it's surprising they'd done maybe it was the record company's like, well, you just did a double album with Tommy. We're not going to do another double album.
Yeah.
Right. The record companies were weird.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've got some underlooked tracks for you.
Yeah, hit us with them, and then we'll have to wrap up in a few minutes. I'm getting the signal from beyond.
Sure.
If you know what I mean.
I would put in, I don't even know myself. I would put that in an underlooked track.
Oh yeah.
Which there's a live version on the Isle of Wight that's also good. And the studio version is good. I'm gonna put in there Dogs Part 2.
Oh yeah, I like that.
Which is an extremely obscure song.
That was
from it was on one of the early 60s albums. It's just an instrumental with somebody barking like a dog through it. I think it's Keith. But it is such a powerful drum and guitar combo riff together. And it appeared, I first heard it as when in around 79, they reissued Pinball Wizard as a single. I think to coincide with The Kids Are All Right. and it was the B-side on that single, which I had never heard it before, and then I found it. You know, you could find it on obscure UK import albums.
They did some great instrumentals in their time, I have to say. Yeah.
I'm also going to put in there "Cry If You Want."
Oh yeah.
From It's Hard.
That was It's Hard. Yeah, it was on It's Hard.
Which I think was released as a single, but it didn't get as much airplay. But it's just, you know, it's a good, hard-hitting, rocking song. And then around 2006, they started doing a weird montage of My Generation that they'd segue into Cry If You Want. But a very different version of Cry If You Want. Is much more, I don't know, bluesy. I don't know how you would describe it, but it was kind of like, it had a different feel to it, but it was definitely the same song.
I think I've heard that, yeah.
It's on my 40 Years compilation. It's like the last song on the last disc. I'm also going to put in there. I'm oscillating between either Guitar and Pen or Music Must Change from Who Are You? Now, Music Must Change is really weird because there's no drumming on it because Keith couldn't find the time and the timing time.
Literally.
Right. So that's why there's this weird, like, you know, there's a sound of a coin dropping and like squeaky shoes walking across the floor and stuff. That's all to fill in the void because Keith was not able to play the whatever the time is, a 4/4 or whatever, on that song. You just couldn't manage it. But I still like that song.
You know, it's funny you should mention that. I'm sorry to interrupt. I'd always wondered what would happen if you tried to get Keith Moon to play Money, Pink Floyd's song, in 7/8 time. That must have just probably killed him.
And Floyd was famous for that too, of just using weird time signatures and all sorts of that.
Who uses 7/8 time? But anyway, sorry.
Nobody other than Pink Floyd.
Yeah.
Pete would always say that, or I don't know about always, but there was an interview where he said it, so I'm going to say that Keith had some kind of weird inner metronome, and he'd be, you know, with you in the beginning and then all over the place in the middle, and you think like, what the fuck, where is this going to come together? And then suddenly he's right back with you and finishes it off, and it's just like, whoa. He was just doing his own thing. He was freestyling. It's not that he couldn't keep time, he just didn't want to.
He didn't want to. Yeah, he had his entire.
You know, it was more interesting to not keep time than it was to keep time. He wasn't a timekeeper kind of drummer. I had another obscure track that I thought deserving. You know, I'm gonna throw this in there just because I'm bringing this list up off the top of my head. One last one, and I'm gonna go with "Now I'm a Farmer" from Odds and Sods.
Listen, that is obscure. Even I can barely remember that one, and I've got Odds and Sods. It's one of the ones I would fast forward over when I was trying to listen to the other ones.
It's just something about that song that I always liked. It's just kind of, it's just so goofy and weird.
But it's also very unlike Pete, if you think about it. Pete being a farmer doesn't seem...
Well, I think at the time Roger has a farm, and he was having a go at trout farming, I believe.
Trout, yeah. So, yeah, that's a good one. I'll have to go listen to that again later. So, Metallica's my friend. Anything we haven't mentioned, any particular track that you would always consider as a standout that you would go back to?
Not really. I think we've pretty much covered all of it between the two of you guys. And you guys both know the band a lot better than I do.
No, well, there's, you've mentioned a lot of good stuff that, I appreciate you bringing up. So thank you. And you've clearly been listening to some of the peak rock era of the Who.
Oh, yeah.
Peak rock. Yeah, when they became something other than they started out as, that's for sure. And then the band that inspired thousands of deaf people.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I think I'm going to, unfortunately, I think it's time for us to wrap up. But that's 3 hours, 10 minutes. So thank you for your stamina, gentlemen.
Well,
hey, if you want to do a volume 2, I am down. I could.
No, I think we should do a round 2. Maybe not next week, but maybe in 2 or 3 weeks once I'm back to work and I know what my schedule is going to be. I think round 2 is required.
Well, I mean, with a band like the Who, there's so much to cover.
Yeah, and I think we could focus a little bit more on certain albums we haven't talked about. We could probably prepare some more clips that we can get away with to play, so we can play a little bit of music and maybe
I
talk a
was
little
jotting
bit.
down little notes of things maybe to talk about, and I've crossed ones out that we covered, but I still got like 3 or 4 left of things. So
Oh yeah,
there's still
me
more.
too. I've got a pile of stuff here we never got to, but that's okay. 60 years of a band, you're not going to cover it all in one show. But I think
What?
You guys really were brilliant. I thank you very much for coming on and accompanying me on this.
Thanks
You
for
are
having
most
me. It
welcome,
was a lot
sir.
of fun.
No, it was fun. Yeah, you guys really. If it was just me sitting here talking, I would have ran out about an hour ago. Well, I wouldn't have. I just repeated myself. But what about this track? Well, but yeah, that was so much fun. I'd like to thank the others that came on: Toxic, Manflu, and Tom Connors, who's always great to stream with Tom. Have I missed anybody? Was it just the 5 of us?
No, I think it was just the 5 of us.
It was just 5 of us. I think, oh my God, I'm going to forget somebody. I'd love to thank the chat with Brahma Bull, with Darius. It's Courtney, who was on our 5th farewell tour at the end there. Punk Waddle stayed with us. Commander Ed Straker, thank you. Your contribution was immense in the chat.
Yeah, he had some pretty good insights.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, he's a good guy, and he likes some of the same sci-fi as me, so we're simpatico there. Mark D with a C stuck with us through most of the show. Kitty Bear, Lord Thoth, your Muslim uncle, great guy. I don't know, there's just so many people were there that had to leave. D-Bud, Man of War, great guy as well. I don't know, I'm going to forget people. I'm sorry if I do. You were all fantastic. Thank you for contributing to this great show. We all love The Who, and this has been within the bounds of copyright, I think the best tribute we could do.
Pretty much.
I'm probably still going to have to chop something out, I would say. But so just before we do go, though, I'd like to give you guys the chance, obviously, to plug some stuff. So I'll start with you, my friend, Pope Metallicus.
Hey guys, I'm Pope Metallicus. I run a small YouTube channel over on my side of things. I do a weekly gaming stream of whatever I'm playing at the moment. I actually haven't decided what the next game we're going to play is. So that'll be on Thursday nights. And then this Thursday, we have our host here coming on my channel to talk Saxon with him and Nick Weiser. So that should be a really good experience. So
seize the day.
Absolutely. that album is just ridiculously good, especially for how old they are at this point.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that stream, buddy. We're going to kill it. It's going to be great.
Absolutely. But yeah, hopefully you'll join us for that and stick around for the other stuff. So thanks for having me on, man.
Cool. No problem. My pleasure. And my friend, Legalize, I know you got a little channel too, and you do stuff. So if you want to plug anything, let me know.
Sure. I've got a channel on YouTube. You can find it by searching for Legalized Adulthood. This link's in the chat. And I kind of been throwing up on there like little clips from TV shows and movies that I find funny or interesting. And there's some karaoke clips of me singing there and some of my friends as well. Been thinking about doing some karaoke clips just for YouTube, kind of working on my setup for that. So that might happen at some point. Otherwise, you can generally find me hanging out on the Nerdrotic Discord.
Indeed, we chat on there often. But yes, thank you, my friend, for joining me. It's been a pleasure. Let me hit the right button here. Oh, there we go. We're back. So I might, being an egotistical chap, expand myself. Oh my God, you can see the wrinkles. So thank you for joining, everyone. Tomorrow night I will be on 32 Flavors of Nick Visor at 7 p.m. Pacific, and we're Toxic Tuesdays. Great show. We're doing Caddyshack this week. This coming Thursday, as Metallica said, Pope Metallicus, Nick and I think Nick's joining us, will be covering and reviewing the new Saxon album, Carpe Diem, trad hard metal rules.
Absolutely.
Trad hard rock rules. In fact, my radio channel, some point this week, I'm going to do that 70s Rock Fan radio channel. I'm going to do an all 70s heavy metal special, I think. So anyone that asks for stuff from beyond that, forget it. It's all going to be all 70s all the time on that show. And that'll be some unannounced time later this week. Friday, I'll be doing, as usual, Foulball Productions MFR Cocktail Lounge, and I'll probably be dropping a couple of videos this week on other stuff, one of which will be a malt whiskey review, which is something I want to get into more. So that's my schedule. And then next week I'm going back to work, so I'll probably disappear and you'll never see me again. It's probably a complete relief to everybody. So, thanks again, gents. Thanks, chat. Until next time, everybody have a good evening. And I'm going to try and find one of my millions of outro videos or whatever the hell. So until then, till next time, keep on rocking.
Thanks for having me.